Hello and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Wednesday, October 23rd. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, John Elmer, Asa Winstanley, and Tamara Nassar. It's day 383 of Israel's genocide in Gaza as the war on Lebanon expands. Coming up, we'll have a discussion with Justin Podur about 𝐓𝐿 Sinwar and his lifelong role in the Palestinian struggle for liberation. And later on in the program, John will cover the latest from the battle in the Jabalia refugee camp, the death of 𝐓𝐿 Sinwar, and the Lebanon front. But before we go to the news, as many of you probably know, British counterterrorism police on Thursday raided the home and seized several electronic devices belonging to our colleague Asa, an associate editor at the Electronic Intifada. Approximately 10 officers arrived at Asa's North London home before 6 a.m. and served the journalist with warrants and other papers authorizing them to search his house and vehicle for devices and documents. A letter addressed to Winstanley from the Counter-Terrorism Command of the Metropolitan Police Service indicates that the authorities are, quote, aware of your profession as a journalist, but that, quote, notwithstanding, police are investigating possible offenses under Sections 1 and 2 of the Terrorism Act of 2006. These provisions set out the purported offense of, quote, encouragement of terrorism. Asa, before we go to the rest of the show, we wanted to have you talk about the situation and tell us any updates on this egregious act of intimidation and attempt at censorship by the British police. What happened to you?
Well, it's part of an escalating pattern of oppression by the British state against activists who campaign in solidarity with Palestine in Britain, and increasingly now journalists. You know, as we've covered on the stream, the journalist Richard Medhurst had his devices seized when he was crossing the border, when he was coming into Britain. Similar things have happened in the past. Last year to Tony Greenstein, who's, as we've mentioned before, is a contributor to the Electronic Intifada, a published author. For him, they specified certain posts on X, formerly Twitter, that they claimed were illegal. They arrested him. They charged him. In my case, they didn't arrest or charge me, which is it's unusual. Like, I don't think it happens very often, and yet they have invaded my home. They didn't break down the door physically, but there's no doubt they could have done that if they'd chosen to do so. It was 5:40 in the morning. It was still dark. We heard a very loud initial ringing of the doorbell, then banging on the door very insistently. Open up. When we said, "Who is it?" they said, "It's the police." And they were very, very insistent, and so I had to go down and unlock the door in my dressing gown. And there was about 10 or so police officers. It was hard to tell. They took control of the house, and they took all my devices that I use for my journalism. Took my computers, my phone, an old phone, iPad, and they were very specific, as you mentioned, Nora. They said they wanted me to specify to them which devices were used for journalism. And, from their point of view, from what they were claiming to me, this was so that they didn't interfere with my work as a journalist, that they didn't want to cause me problems. But it was all extremely Kafkaesque in that sense. They weren't personally violent, or it was very British in a lot of ways, right? There was this sort of patina of fairness right, and not being rude, but and they try to do things by the book because obviously, you know, they know I'm a journalist and they know we're going to report on this. So that's the situation. I haven't been charged with anything. I haven't been arrested. And they're claiming that I violated these laws. Well, you know, we'll see about that, and we'll see what the what my legal team are able to find out more about what they are claiming that I've done wrong, because they wouldn't say. The senior officer, I said, so why are you doing this? And he would only say social media posts, and he refused to specify which social media posts. Our legal team is going to try and find out more, and I think we will be finding out more. And I've had a lot of support. Like I really want to thank everybody who's watching, because and you guys as well. You know, the loyalty of the team at EI was never in doubt. But I feel the support from around the world from you guys, and it's very humbling. And I thank everybody who's watching, because I know, I mean, I'm sorry if I haven't replied to your message. I probably haven't, because I'm sort of overwhelmed with all sorts of supportive messages, emails, texts, all sorts of messages of support and outrage. And I've had some private messages of support from people that you may be surprised about. So you know, it's obviously a blow. There's no doubt about that. You know, everything's obviously, I've got access to my own data and my own archive, but it takes a while to rebuild these things. You know, regular viewers will probably recognize the angle of my cameras different. I'm on my new phone at the moment. We can rebuild. We will build. They won't stop me carrying on. And I've already started writing a new article with pen and paper. So
back to basics.
That's what we're doing for now. And we'll be rebuilt. We'll be back better. We're back stronger, and they won't stop us.
No, they won't. Ali, what can you say about what we're doing about defending 𝐓𝐡𝐞 and his property and his work, but also defending the work of all of us at the Electronic Intifada?
Yeah, just a couple of things I want to add to what 𝐓𝐡𝐞 said. That I believe the police subsequently clarified this wasn't in their initial documentation, but they subsequently clarified that there was, they clarified the provisions of the Terrorism Act that they were acting under. And these are provisions that are purely about criminalizing speech. This is really important to emphasize. And we don't know what they're accusing 𝐓𝐡𝐞 of. As 𝐓𝐡𝐞 said, he wasn't arrested, he wasn't charged. They wouldn't reveal the social media posts that they claim may be in violation of these laws. But we know that they've used these laws in other cases to criminalize mere statements of fact. I mean, if you were to say that Palestinians have a right to resist Israeli military occupation, under these draconian laws, they could construe that as an invitation to support terrorism, even though the right to resist is enshrined in international law. And there's no question Palestinians have a right to resist. So it's important for people to understand the really draconian level of this kind of repression. And, excuse me, and that these laws would be completely unconstitutional were they in the United States. I'm certainly not painting the United States as a paragon of free speech. We know that that's not the case. And as we've said, censorship in the United States is carried out through private institutions like universities and media companies and social media platforms like some of the ones that people will be viewing us on now. But the government in the US could not do what the British authorities are doing to 𝐓𝐡𝐞. Now, the devices, as 𝐓𝐡𝐞 said, the devices which the police seized include the devices, 𝐓𝐡𝐞's phone, his computer that he uses for his journalism for the Electronic Intifada. And we consider this to be material that should be privileged, that a journalist's sources should be protected. There would have to be really extraordinary circumstances for the state to try to invade that kind of privileged material. And that's 100% not the case here, not even remotely. They've even said that this is about things that opinions 𝐓𝐴SA has posted, or perhaps factual statements, we don't know yet, that 𝐓𝐴SA has posted on social media. So there's no pretext on which they could possibly need to be snooping around 𝐓𝐴SA's hard drives or phone. So we, as the Electronic Intifada, have hired the law firm Bindmans in the UK, which is one of the best law firms. Their lawyer Tayyab Ali is renowned in the UK for his proficiency with these kinds of cases. And our instructions to him are to do whatever he can to prevent the British state from accessing any material on 𝐓𝐴SA's devices that relates to the journalism of the Electronic Intifada. We will do what we can to protect our sources, to protect our information as a matter of principle, to resist this attack on media freedom, and to defend 𝐓𝐴SA's rights, our rights, and the rights of all journalists.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Ali. 𝐓𝐴SA, can you talk about kind of the mood that these kinds of intimidation tactics have created within, leftist journalist circles? I mean, as you said, this is not the first time in recent months that the UK police have gone after journalists, specifically those who post about or write about Palestine. What is this kind of raid on your house and seizure of your devices meant to do, and how is it reverberating within similar circles in the UK?
Yeah, I think it is intended to send a message. It's intended to spread a chilling effect. It's intended as a warning. It's intended to stop the mass support there is for Palestine. And I don't mean from the individual, even from the individual officers. Some of those individual officers may have been very genuine in and of themselves when they were saying, well, we don't want to stop you doing journalism, but you're suspected of violating the law, so we have to do our job. They may have been personally genuine about that. I can't know what's in their minds, but whoever is deciding in the higher up authorities to carry on with this kind of political persecution has in mind the fact that they don't have control of the British population. For a year, people have carried on resisting the genocide in Gaza. People are coming out on the streets week in and week out. The actions of Palestine Action, the direct action group, which has carried on since it was formed in 2000, from targeting the facilities in this country of Elbit Systems, the Israeli drone maker, arms manufacturer, weapons systems manufacturer, which has nearly 10 premises in this country, 2 less than they used to have, because Palestine Action have forced at least 2, I think maybe 3 now of them out of business, as we've covered on this stream and in our articles in the past. And of course, Palestine Action activists have been some of my sources in the past. So it really raises the question of, is this a phishing exercise? Are they trying to get to Palestine Action through me? Are they trying to endanger other activists? Is this a personal vendetta by the higher up authorities against me as somebody who has written a book weaponizing anti-Semitism, of course, about how the Israel lobby brought down Jeremy Corbyn as the leader of the Labour Party before he could become Prime Minister, how there was interference by the British state, how there was interference by the Israeli state in Britain, in the British political process, in collusion with the American deep state and the British deep state. I've been reporting for a decade on these issues in the Labour Party. The Labour Party is now in government. Is there an element of personal vendetta about this? We don't know. We don't know the reality of what's going on with the decision makers. This whole thing is extremely very opaque, but it's sending a message to other activists, to academics, intellectuals, other journalists, and even a few politicians who may be more on the left, that it's a warning to them, because Sarah Wilkinson, Tony Greenstein, Mick Napier, Craig Murray, the former ambassador, as well, in the past, who the former British ambassador, who is now a journalist in his own right, a writer, a blogger, and a campaigner, parliamentary candidate, and so forth, but also was also stopped on the border at a certain point. There's got to be a lot of people now asking who is next. Now Asa Winstanley has had his home raided. Who's next? Who's going to be next? And the reality is, we just don't know. We just don't know. But it seems unlikely. Even if this is the end of it for me, I don't know whether it's the end of it for me. I mean, this is part of the effect that, and this is, my sources in activist circles who this has happened to over the last few years, and not just the last year. This is what they always say. Like, it's intended to keep this hanging over your head. It's like what the Israelis do in the West Bank. They say, well, we're taking out a case, and they don't charge you, but they keep it over your head. Like they sort of imply that they could possibly charge you in the future. It has a very, very serious chilling effect, and it has a large degree of uncertainty. So I don't know whether or not this is the end of it or just the beginning of it. I just don't know. That's the reality. So it's intended to send a message. It's intended to stop people from supporting the Palestinians, and that's ultimately what this is all about. But people are not lying down. People are outraged, and there seems to be no strategic thinking by the British state here. Very much, like we've discussed time and time again on this stream, very much like the Israelis. There's no strategic thinking. The Israelis are killing and killing and killing, and there's no forethought to the fact that if they kill the resistance leaders now, it's only going to inspire the next generation of Palestinian people who are resisting them and resisting what they're doing. So in a similar way here in this country, the fact that young people are who are trying to campaign and trying to stop these arms factories from being shut down are being put into solitary confinement in British jails right now, and are suffering and being put into isolation, and all kinds of oppression that we barely hear about, as we've talked about when we've had Palestine Action on the past and the stream. It, in the longer term, it raises awareness. Those people's families and those people's friends are going to be thinking, what is going on here? What is so serious? What is so wrong about what they've done? And in the same way, what's happened to me has engendered so much support. Like, just a small thing, my last article has gone viral again, I've noticed. So it's brought more attention to my work in that way. So this is the silver lining, that there's no, they are setting up themselves for failure in the future.
Yeah, thanks for that, Asa. Ali, what can we say about where this goes next? Oh, you're muted, Ali.
I'd just like to reiterate Asa's thanks to everyone, because we've also received an enormous number of messages of support, and lots of people have been asking. I mean, I even see people saying that in the comments now, what can we do to help? And my answer to that is raise a ruckus about this, because these intimidation tactics only work if they can isolate people. But if they see that there is a big uproar and the public are telling their politicians and their MPs and whoever it is and saying this is outrageous, then that does have an impact. In terms of the legal process, we're at the beginning of that. So I don't know yet exactly how that's going to play out. What I can say is we are determined to do everything we can to stop the British authorities from accessing these devices, which we consider to be a gross violation of free speech, of media freedom, of human rights, completely unjustifiable, and we will fight to stop that. And so what we will do is we will keep people informed as we can. And when there's something we can do, lots of people have said, can I make a donation to support any legal costs? At the moment, we're not asking specifically for that. Maybe sometime down the road, we'll need that, and we'll ask people. And I know lots of people will want to be there. We greatly appreciate your general support for EI, for Asa's journalism. This raid on his home, this outrageous attack came just days after he published that viral article about how Israel killed hundreds of its own people on October 7th. So to continue to defy the government by sharing the journalism and making sure more people know about it. And also, as Asa said in a tweet yesterday that I thought was a very lovely tweet, Asa, that the keep the focus on Gaza. Do stay tuned to this, and we will keep you informed, but we want to keep the focus on Gaza because all of this is about suppressing opposition and resistance to this genocide.
Exactly. Well, thanks. And obviously we'll be updating as things progress. Thank you to everyone for your support over the last week around this, and of course over the last 12 months of this genocide. And we will continue reporting as we always do. Just thank you to everyone. So before we go to the rest of our program, a discussion with Justin Podur and John's resistance report, here's a brief summary of some of the latest developments in Gaza and Lebanon. In Gaza last Thursday, Israeli forces killed Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar while he was on the front lines defending Rafah in the south. In an announcement delivered by Khalil al-Hayya, head of Hamas in Gaza, the resistance group said that Sinwar, quote, dedicated his life for Palestine and sacrificed his soul for the sake of God on the path to its liberation. Our senior editor, Maureen Claire Murphy, writes that Israeli propagandists may have thought that publishing photos and videos of Sinwar's last moments and his lifeless body would instill feelings of defeat and humiliation among supporters of the Palestinian resistance. The images have instead had the opposite effect and will only cement his already legendary status. They show that Sinwar died in combat like a rank-and-file fighter in perhaps not his first direct engagement with Israeli troops, rather than accepting exile or being killed in retreat. We'll have more on the killing of Yahya Sinwar coming up later in John's resistance report and in our discussion with Justin. Meanwhile, Israel is continuing to systematically destroy the northern Gaza Strip, carrying out ethnic extermination campaigns and forced mass expulsion. For nearly 3 weeks, Israel has blocked food, water, medicine, and fuel from reaching the areas north of Gaza City, as the remaining reporters and health workers there describe scenes of catastrophic horror. On Saturday, images and video emerged of what journalists have described as a death march around the Indonesian hospital in Beit Lahia. Reporter Hossam Shabat stated that Israeli occupation forces dug a, quote, deep hole in one of the squares surrounding the Indonesian hospital and placed male Palestinians in it with their hands tied and their eyes blindfolded. Shabat had reported that in the days leading up to this death march, the hospital had been surrounded by tanks as Israeli soldiers cut the electricity, bombed the building, and targeted the second and third floors with artillery shells. In the Jabalia refugee camp, Israeli forces forced families to leave their homes and attacked a school turned into a shelter on Monday. Hossam Shabat reported that they, quote, lined people up and shot anyone who dared to move. Any male over the age of 16 is being detained, tortured, and investigated. Many people who are being lined up are sick individuals, such as amputees, cancer patients, and young kids who are being asked to stand in line for hours. The situation is catastrophic, he said. Novelist Ahmed Masood, who has been on this live stream before and has family in Jabalia and Beit Lahia, tweeted on Tuesday that his relatives have been separated from each other by gender, with Israeli soldiers detaining the men. He added that he has had no contact with his family members since. On Tuesday, reporter Anas Al-Sharif stated that Israeli drones with loudspeakers ordered more than 10,000 displaced Palestinians to leave a school shelter in Beit Lahia and would be bombed or shot if they refused. These mass expulsions come on the heels of relentless massacres across northern Gaza. Along with the Indonesian hospital, Al-Aqsa hospital was also directly hit in Israeli attacks on Friday. And on Tuesday, the acting director of Al-Aqsa stated that Israeli forces were again besieging the hospital. Also on Tuesday, Dr. Hassam Abu Safia, the director of Kamal Adwan Hospital in Beit Lahia, issued a distress call saying that Israeli forces had bombed the gate of the hospital and that quadcopter drones were dropping bombs. The upper floors of the hospital were being shot at and that all services had collapsed, he said. Quote, there are no blood units or tubes to drain bleeding from the chest, and most of the medical supplies are not available. He added that people who evacuated were shot on the way out of the hospital. Dr. Abu Safia warned, quote, Kamal Adwan Hospital will turn into mass graves. In a statement on Tuesday, Munir al-Bursh, the director of the health ministry in Gaza, who is currently in the north, said that hospitals, quote, have run out of coffins to prepare the dead, and we have asked people to donate any fabric they have at home. Palestinian health officials and the Civil Emergency Corps say that dozens of bodies of people killed by Israeli fire remain scattered on roads and under rubble, with rescue teams unable to reach them. The United Nations says that on Thursday, Israel bombed a UN school in Jabalia refugee camp hosting displaced people, killing at least 28 Palestinians and wounding 160. Early Saturday morning, Israel bombed several houses in Jabalia, killing at least 33 and injuring dozens more. Later on Saturday, dozens of people were killed in Beit Lahia as Israeli warplanes razed entire residential blocks, Maureen writes. The Gaza Health Ministry reported that at least 87 people were killed and people were trapped under the rubble. 3 prominent Palestinian human rights groups, Al-Haq, Al-Mizan, and the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, said this week that civilians in northern Gaza are, quote, being punished for continuing to refuse to follow Israel's unlawful forcible displacement orders. With no safe place to go, Palestinians in Gaza's north are fearful that if they flee, they will never be able to return, Maureen adds. Journalist Hossam Shabat reported that Israel has, quote, rigged residential zones with explosives. Israeli soldiers, he says, are setting explosive barrels at night and detonating them during the day, resulting in devastating destruction and death. They are moving closer to densely populated areas where residents are unable to flee due to surveillance by quadcopters that target anyone who attempts to move. Israel's goal is to destroy every building in the Jabalia refugee camp and kill its residents in order to annex the land. And amid the total closure of northern Gaza to any food, medicine, or water, Israeli forces killed 6 Palestinian men when they tried to access drinking water in Jabalia camp on Monday, according to Al Jazeera. But Israel also killed workers on their way to repair a water line in the south, in Khan Yunis. The international aid group Oxfam stated on Monday that Israel bombed a clearly marked vehicle belonging to engineers and workers from the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 municipality in coordination with Oxfam's partners at the coastal municipality's water utility. The 4 men were killed on their way to conduct repairs to water infrastructure in 𝐓𝐡𝐞, east of Khan Yunis, and their movements had been coordinated with the Israeli military beforehand. The government media office in Gaza says Israeli forces have prevented the entry of, quote, more than 250,000 trucks of aid and goods since the war began last year, adding that it was part of Israel's strategy of, quote, reinforcing the starvation policy and using it as a weapon of war against civilians and against children, especially by preventing the entry of food, baby milk, and nutritional supplements. Capitulating to Israel's severe restrictions or outright preventions of aid deliveries by land into Gaza as people starve, international aid-dropped parcels have somewhat resumed. One of those parcels killed a 3-year-old boy, Sami Ayad, in the southern city of Khan Yunis on Saturday, according to his relatives and reported by CNN. Quote, the family was eating breakfast when pallets dropped from airplanes and careened toward the displacement area, the grandfather of the boy, who's also named Sami Ayad, told CNN. Several family members attempted to take cover inside their improvised tents, but the falling parcel killed the 3-year-old instantly, Ayad recalled. Sami's aunt and cousin were also wounded on their foot and face, respectively, Ayad added. I was sitting here with the boy, and the moment I left him, the package fell on him, Ayad said. There was only a second between me and him. I carried him and started running. We have no hospitals. I ran like crazy, but the boy died instantly. I couldn't save him. Blood started coming out of his nose and mouth, he added. Our contributor Yousef Al-Jamal said on Monday that a young man he interviewed for a story we just published on the Electronic Intifada was killed. Yousef Abu Rabi, a farmer and food provider, was killed Monday in a drone strike near his plant nursery after he was delivering fresh produce to people in Beit Lahia. In the days before he was killed, Yousef Al-Jamal writes, Abu Rabi posted a short video on his Instagram account documenting him and another person ducking for cover on a narrow street. They had come under fire while distributing parcels of food in bright blue plastic bags, the gunshots audible in the video. Writer, chef, and journalist Leila Al-Haddad stated that, quote, Israel assassinated farmer Yousef Abu Rabi and his 2 colleagues today as they were delivering seedlings to his neighbors in the north. He was a true hero, resisting genocide in impossible circumstances. In a recent video, Abu Rabi highlights the resilience and determination of the people in the north. I'll let the video play and then translate afterwards for accessibility.
شو بدنا نحكي للأمان الناس الموجودة هان ناس جبارة وعظيمة للأمان بدون مبالغة وبدون مجاملة ناس جبارة للأمان بالرغم من كل هالدمار والخراب مصرين على البقاء والزراعة بقول لك بدنا نرجع من أول وجديد حنعمرها وإن شاء الله بنعمرها وبنسرحها بإذن الله.
He says, the people who are here, they're truly great and resilient. Without exaggeration, they are. In spite of all this destruction, people are still insisting on staying, planting, and wanting to rebuild again. In his feature that we just published, Yousef Al-Jamal, who interviewed Abu Rabi at length about his agricultural project in northern Gaza, writes, quote, that Palestinian farmers were even able to plant during a genocide is a marvel, and the loss of any food producer is devastating to society as a whole, while Israel uses starvation as a weapon of war. The killing of a young farmer like Abu Rabi, who provided a lifeline to his community, leaves other Palestinians in Gaza's north, where almost no food has been allowed in since the beginning of the month, much more vulnerable. Meanwhile, Michael Fakhri, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food, admonished members of the so-called international community this week in a UN hearing. He said, quote, 1 year ago, I stood before you and told you that food is increasingly used as a weapon against civilians. Exactly 1 year ago, I, amongst other mandate holders, raised the alarm for the risk of genocide against the Palestinian people. Unfortunately, you did not take sufficient action, and as my colleagues and I predicted, Israel's war proved to be a genocidal campaign against the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people have faced genocide for a year with no signs of Israel abating. What the world has learned is no amount of facts and figures, no amount of horror, no amount of death and pain is enough to trigger a global response to starvation and genocide. We've published so many features on the Electronic Intifada in the last week, but we wanted to highlight excerpts of this one by Assam al-Nabih in Gaza City. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 is an engineer and PhD researcher and serves as the spokesperson for the Gaza municipality. Quote, I have buried a friend's charred remains, seen orphaned boys and girls become guardians to their siblings, and witnessed parents carrying their children's remains in plastic bags for burial, unsure if all the body parts belong to their son or daughter. I have also witnessed a hospital be turned into a makeshift military base and another a cemetery. I know of survivors who have succumbed to infections from minor cuts, as the entry of essential antibiotics into Gaza is arbitrarily banned by Israel. Gaza is filled with the scent of blood, with many suffering from severe injuries, amputated limbs, and trauma. Ordinary civilians have repurposed abandoned Israeli military crates used to carry ammunition to kill Palestinians as firewood for cooking, with scarcely any fuel entering Gaza. We have turned our cars into homes, tarpaulin tents into schools and clinics, mattresses into stretchers, and escaped to overcrowded UNRWA schools in search of safety and refuge, only for those shelters to be bombed. As we continue to adapt, we are all becoming the, quote, living embodiments of pending funerals, as I heard a grieving mother say. Many of us in Gaza's north have had to survive by eating leaves and snails. Others in the south make do with cans of tasteless fava and kidney beans or expired food. Aid agencies call it a famine. It should be called what it truly is, deliberate starvation. It is as stark as white flour, though I have seen hungry children sifting through flour mixed with sand and debris. These children are the fortunate ones. I have spent many long nights waiting in queues at bakeries, flour distribution centers, partially functioning water wells, and aid points where groups offer the same repetitive food parcels. But I am more than just a statistic. Like 2.3 million other Gazans, I have a family, parents, children, siblings, memories, pain, emotions, and a home, albeit now in the form of rubble. I am too exhausted to ask when this will end. I am demanding that this end now. Those are excerpts from This Must End Now by Asim al-Nabih on electronicintifada.net. Turning northwards, Israel has escalated its bombing attacks against civilians across Lebanon in recent days. Israeli forces carried out several strikes in Beirut's southern suburbs on Monday, including one near the Rafik Hariri University Hospital, the capital's main government hospital. The attack killed more than a dozen people, including a child, and injured more than 50, according to Lebanese health authorities. Administrators at the Sahel Hospital in South Beirut reported that the medical facility was evacuated following warnings issued by Israel. On Monday, Israeli military spokesman Daniel Hagari claimed that Hezbollah was holding millions of dollars in gold and cash in assassinated leader Hassan Nasrallah's personal bunker underneath the hospital. The same kinds of baseless claims of hidden military bunkers underneath hospitals in Gaza that Israel made in order to justify bombing them. On Monday, Israeli airstrikes targeted residential apartment buildings in southern Beirut. The number of people killed since Israel's offensive in Lebanon began has risen to almost 2,500, with nearly 12,000 more injured. And some 1.2 million people, a quarter of Lebanon's population, have been displaced from their homes. On Sunday, signaling a further broadening of its assault on civilian life, Israel bombed branches and offices of Al-Aqsa, a credit union that gives out small loans to citizens, but that Israel claims is part of the financial infrastructure of the Lebanese resistance group Hezbollah. John will have much more on the situation in Lebanon and Hezbollah's attacks on Israeli military and political installations coming up later in the program. Finally, as we always do, we wanted to share videos of people expressing defiance and resilience in the face of Israel's widening campaign of destruction. This video shows a woman in Lebanon making coffee in her destroyed home.
قهوة عالمفرق في موقدي وفي نار نبقى أنا وحبيبي نفرشها بالأسرار جيت لقيت فيها عشاق اتنين صغار.
And this video, recorded and shared by the Gaza Sunbirds paracycling team, shows one of their members in the central Gaza Strip preparing bread and manakish amid the rubble of his home, enjoying this classic Palestinian breakfast.
يعطيك العافية عبود.
الله يعافيك. أنا شوي. الله الله الله.
سواك هذا هنا. طول الزعترات.
مناقيش الزعتر فطور الصباح. بده تحريك.
And that's it for the news roundup. As always, go to electronicintifada.net for much more, especially to read our new features by our brave writers in Gaza. You're watching the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleague Ali Abunimah. Hi, Ali.
Hi, Nora. I just want to acknowledge that for all of us, we don't have the words to describe how we feel about what we're seeing, what our friends, our families, our loved ones are going through. And, you know, I think sometimes all we can do is bear witness to it and keep our voices loud. And there's so much there to absorb, Nora. And the piece from 𝐓𝐡𝐞, in particular from 𝐓𝐡𝐞 and Nabih, was just so piercing. And he's an incredible person. He's by coincidence, I met him more than 10 years ago. I went to Gaza and he was a university student. And he represents for me the best spirit of Gaza, someone who continues to be steadfast through all the ways that you can. And it's just extraordinary, the article he wrote, and more importantly, what he's doing in an effort to keep supporting people.
Yeah. I mean, this week, the scenes that have been coming out of North Gaza have been just unspeakable, absolutely unspeakable. And today, the Israeli military announced that, basically put a target on the backs of the few remaining journalists who are there documenting this and putting their lives at risk every day, to be the messengers of the people who are suffering these just completely unbearable atrocities.
Yeah, it's very worrying. The Israeli army put out a tweet naming and showing the photos of some of these well-known correspondents in Gaza, all Palestinians, and they are laying the ground to, I hate to say it, to murder them. And unless, I mean, I don't know if we're going to talk about what our voices mean, but for sure, we should not be quiet about this. And we should be demanding. We talked about this with Layla Al-Arian last week. Why aren't Western media who scream and cry about every supposed violation of a journalist's rights in China or Iran or Russia, why are they silent? Why are they silent? And to watch this and to feel that they're going to do it and nobody is going to stop them. I mean, I pray they won't and they won't succeed, but you know.
Not a peep from establishment media on this. It's just it's despicable and predictable. And I just, we all do, but for these news roundups that I do every week, I rely heavily on the work and witness of these incredibly brave, very young journalists who are, I mean, they've dedicated their lives to providing a very small window into what's happening, especially in northern Gaza. And just all of our solidarity to those journalists working there. So we have a lot to get to get through today. Ali, why don't you introduce Justin?
Thanks, Nora. And just a reminder that you're tuned to the Electronic Intifada live stream, and I'm Ali Abunama here with my colleague Nora Barrows-Friedman. And as Nora told us, the Israeli military announced last Thursday that it killed Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. Hamas confirmed his martyrdom on Friday. But what distinguishes Sinwar's death at Israel's hands from those of other major resistance leaders, including Sinwar's predecessors, Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh and Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, is that Sinwar was not targeted for assassination. Sinwar died as a fighter armed with his own weapon among his own men in the streets of Gaza. The Israelis did not even know they had killed him last Wednesday until after the fact. The way in which Sinwar died, including the iconic video of his final defiant act of throwing a stick at the Israeli drone filming him as he sat gravely injured in an armchair in a bombed-out apartment, has had a rallying rather than demoralizing effect on the resistance and its supporters. It could not have been further from Israeli claims that Sinwar would be hiding deep underground, shielding himself with Israeli captives. Later in the program, we will watch that incredible video with John Elmer, who's going to give us a detailed look at Yahya Sinwar's life and death during his resistance report. So do stay tuned for that. Western political leaders, meanwhile, put out a series of apparently coordinated statements celebrating Sinwar's death, repeating Israeli atrocity propaganda and lies about October 7th, and demonizing a man who spent 2 decades of his life in an Israeli prison and a whole lifetime struggling for the liberation of his people. US President Joe Biden called Sinwar's killing, quote, a good day for Israel, for the United States, and for the world. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer instructed that, quote, no one should mourn the death of Hamas leader Sinwar, while Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau claimed that Sinwar's death, quote, ends a reign of terror. According to our next guest, we should ignore these calumnies against Sinwar written by his genocidal enemies and listen to Sinwar himself if we want to understand him and his role in the Palestinian struggle. Justin Podur makes these points in an article he wrote for the Electronic Intifada this week titled Yahya Sinwar Wrote His Own Story. Many of our audience will know Justin, but for those who don't, he is the author of Siege Breakers, a 2019 novel in which Palestinians in Gaza win a war of liberation. He runs the Anti-Empire Project podcast and YouTube channel, including the Gaza War Sit-Rep series with several videos on the military situation per week. They are really informative and essential viewing. Justin, we're so glad to have you on the Electronic Intifada live stream.
Hey, Justin.
Hey, guys. Thank you. Thank you for having me on. Just listen to your report, Nora, like I do every week. And I mean, yeah. Okay. Let's get on with it.
All right. Well, thank you, Justin. So the title of your article for the Electronic Intifada can be read both lyrically and literally. Literally, because Yahya Sinwar did, in fact, write his own story in the form of a novel titled The Thorn and the Carnation. It was completed in 2004 and smuggled out of the Israeli prison where Israel had planned for Sinwar to spend the rest of his life. Of course, Sinwar was released in that 2011 prisoner exchange for the Israeli prisoner of war, Gilad Shalit. Before we get deeper into the discussion, can you react to the fact that under Israeli pressure, Amazon banned the sale of Sinwar's book in April, but at the same time, Amazon still allows sales of Hitler's Mein Kampf?
I mean, I have a colleague who co-wrote a book on Venezuela with me, Joe Emmersberger, and he wrote a really well-received review of Mein Kampf, and he was basically like, the surprising thing about Mein Kampf is like that when he read it was how much Hitler worshipped the British Empire and how much Hitler was enamored with both the British and the Americans. Couldn't really understand why they would fight. All he wanted to do was kill communists and Jews who were blamed for communism. So if you understand the continuity of the Israeli project with what's written in that book, there's no reason for the supporters of Israel to ban that book at all. On the other hand, Sinwar's book is a book of resistance to that project. The resistance, nowadays Abu Obaida always refers to Israel as the Nazi occupation. They make that link now. Since October 7th, I've seen that the resistance is always now, doesn't hesitate to make that link between what Israel is doing and the continuity with Nazi Germany. And between like the German foreign minister basically saying civilians are open season, which again is continuity with German history in World War II and pre-World War II. World War I, they had the same doctrine. They had the same doctrine in Africa, in their African colonies, where they committed a genocide in 1905. So I don't, when you understand that, it's actually not surprising at all that Sinwar would be banned and Mein Kampf would not be.
Well, let's talk more about Sinwar's book. You write that his novel is full of insight into how Sinwar saw the world and the perspective from which he built up the resistance movement. What do you see as the main themes that emerge from the book, and how do they help us understand the current situation in Gaza and the region, and the interplay between armed resistance, politics, and the ultimate goal of liberating Palestine?
That's a great question. Thank you. This is exactly what I wanted to talk about. There was I did a review of the book for my Substack a little while ago. There was another review on Mondo Weiss by Haneen Odeh-Tallah. I don't know Haneen, but Haneen found several themes in the characters of Sinwar's book, and those three themes that Haneen talked about were self-sacrifice, asceticism, and security awareness. Those were the three things that came through for Haneen in the book. For me, those were definitely present. When you look at the main character of the book, is this a character named Ibrahim. I mean, the point of view character is Ahmed, and he's growing up. And the choice of genre is also important, because I've said before, you could write a horror movie or a horror story with the material that Israel provides every day. You could write, hundreds of horror stories with that material. You could write a romance novel, because there's so much love and care in the way the Palestinians are and treat each other. You could write an adventure, a thriller, a heist. There's all these things you could do. Sinwar's book is a coming of age story. So it's the classic kind of coming of age story. You're watching this character's growing up, and he's watching, and the person that he looks up to is his cousin Ibrahim. And Ibrahim has these three qualities: self-sacrifice, asceticism, and security awareness. But Ibrahim also has a whole bunch of other qualities that I think Sinwar is trying to show readers. These are the important qualities that you have to have if you want to resist, if you want to live a life worth living in this context. So one of them is Ibrahim is a great organizer. He's a campus organizer. He's a business. He has business. He's a construction. He works hard. He's an example to others. He's good at his job. He studies, all of that. He's a whole package, right? He takes care of his family. You guys may have seen a funny clip where Sinwar, I guess, is on a radio show or something, and someone complains that someone's wife is complaining to the radio host that her husband doesn't pay attention to her when Sinwar is on the radio for whatever reason. And Sinwar says, no, that's wrong. You have to take care of your wife. Your wife is the most important thing. That comes first. And so that's also in this story. You got to take care of your family. You have to take care of your loved ones. You have to do your work. You have to study, and your resistance duties and your religious duties. These are all part of these things. And Ibrahim is the whole package. He's very much moved by the suffering of his people. I quoted interview, the 5-day interview he did with that Italian journalist, Francesca Borri, where he talks about the children who've known nothing but
that's Sinwar's interview.
Yeah, Sinwar's interview. Yeah. So I'm going back and forth between Ibrahim and Sinwar because, let's face it, Ibrahim is Sinwar. He's the character that Sinwar wrote, which is kind of like a stand-in for Sinwar himself. And he says, you know, these kids are wondering what's beyond the wave, and that's what I want. I want their freedom. And Ibrahim, similarly, he goes to Al-Aqsa at mosque at one point, and he's looking at he prays at the mosque, and he talks to Ahmed about like the meaning of that, and you know how sacred these holy sites are to him, and the suffering of the people, and all of the dimensions of the conflict. Asceticism and like the ability to, stoicism, right, is a major characteristic of Ibrahim. He goes to prison, he bears that. The way that the narrator and the way that Sinwar himself, the story, the author, describes all of the horrors that the Israelis are inflicting, they're very descriptive, but it's not like he's not trying to make you afraid. He's trying to tell you, like, these are human beings, they're doing awful things, you will suffer. But there's a line that he says multiple times where he says it was tough, but it was bearable. And don't ever break. So the security awareness comes in, where, you know, the character that actually accidentally reveals information to the Israelis ends up going to prison for longer. You know, the Israelis love to face you with that prisoner's dilemma, right? We already know, so we want you to tell us. Well, they don't already know, and they don't know until you told them. And that's a message that Sinwar really wants his readers to know. So there's several instances where the person who talks, you know, ends up getting it worse. It doesn't actually benefit you to spy for the Israelis, to give information to the Israelis. The book is full of technological detail. Characters carefully study the technology, the Israeli intelligence network, their spy network, the techniques they use, the hard techniques, the soft techniques, right? The way that they interrogate, the way that they build these networks up. All of that is in the book. And it's another thing, like, he wants readers to use this book to think about how Israel builds that state and that apparatus of oppression, and how to begin to undo it. He's adapted to their surveillance. So just to read you a quote about the way Ibrahim, his character, understands surveillance. And this is another admiring, the narrator is describing Ibrahim in an admiring way, this quality that he has. He says, Ibrahim had a high ability to present things naturally, to conceal what was inside him, to suppress his emotions, and to disguise in a way that even his wife rarely sensed his unusual movements during his duties and roles in the Intifada activities, even though he was considered a central figure in his group bearing a significant burden. And the other thing that's like very central, it's so central to Palestinians and Palestinian life that I think it's almost invisible to them, is the centrality of education. And so the constant disruptions, I mean, the Israelis destroyed all the universities, they destroyed all the schools, they're bombing people outside of the schools. And that's, you know, when these things happen in Sinwar's book, he says, you know, this happens. However, the academic journey had to continue, and a feasible solution was found by converting classrooms, you know, and so it's just this like, it's obviously education has to go on, right? Like it's clearly education has to go on. So these are the kinds of things that I think Yahya Sinwar wanted to convey. He wanted to say that this is a good kind of person. This is a way that a good person lives their life, which is like a lot of what novels and literature are ultimately about.
And his Yahya Sinwar's son was named Ibrahim. He's also known as Abu Ibrahim.
Yeah. And his father. So
his father, right?
Yeah. So it's Yahya Ibrahim Sinwar. So I think that underscores Justin's observation that this character is a stand-in for Yahya Sinwar himself.
Yeah. Justin, we're now in the second year of the Western-backed and orchestrated Israeli genocide. And Israel has expanded its mass killing from Gaza to Lebanon. You often say on your program that there's no end in sight. Sadly, there doesn't seem to be much hope of an imminent ceasefire at this point. What ideas do you see in Sinwar's writings that attempt to answer the question of how a society, a people, a resistance movement can endure amid so much horror and suffering that is deliberately inflicted on them in an effort to break their resistance, if not destroy them completely? Is the level of death and destruction that Israel has perpetrated since last October a sign that Sinwar miscalculated, that his strategy was, a failure of some sort? Or do you, as you interpret the ideas in the book, as well as in his few but significant interviews, how do you think he would respond?
Okay, that's a great question. Let me tackle the miscalculation last, because I think we have to build up to the answer to that question. I think the answer is no. I'll spoil. I'm a spoiler. I'm big on spoilers in everything that I do. But I'll address it at length. As far as how the society resists, there's a lot in The Thorn and the Carnation about this. And he has a character, the significance of names again. He has a character named Sheikh Ahmed. No last name, but Sheikh Ahmed is this important religious leader. He sees boys playing cards, out playing cards, and he comes and he scolds them and he tells them instead of playing cards, they should be praying. He tells them to pray and read and study and work for liberation. And in fact, in the kind of sectarian history of the region, and of the Palestinian movement, there has always been, not always, but decades ago, there was a critique that Hamas didn't do enough in the Intifada and in the armed struggle, and they kind of sat it out, and they only joined later on, and they didn't coordinate with the Fatah and so on. And so this happens in the book. There's a character, a cousin of Ibrahim's, that's with Fatah, and he always wants to compromise. He always wants to make a deal, and Ibrahim is always explaining to him that there's no benefit to a deal. And that is like one of the concepts that I think Sinwar made in both interviews and in the book, that there's no benefit to agreements with Israel. He's very much like in favor of a ceasefire. In various points in the book and in his interviews especially, he talks about a ceasefire, the hudna, the long-term ceasefire, calm for calm. And he talks about it as like, but that's something you do without really an agreement. It's not a negotiation over land. It's not a negotiation over rights. It's just a ceasefire, but it could be a long ceasefire so that people could move on with their lives and get used to things and so on. He describes this, but so his cousin Mahmoud, Ibrahim's cousin, the fictional character, who wants to do Oslo, who wants to go into the Oslo Accords, and Ibrahim tells him, or Mahmoud asks Ibrahim, like, why, if the outcome is the same, why is it so important to not have an agreement with Israel? And Ibrahim says the difference between Israel leaving the West Bank and Gaza through an agreement or not. If they leave by an agreement, it means we Palestinians must adhere to certain obligations, the least of which is recognizing their right to our remaining land. If they leave without an agreement under the pressure of resistance, it means that we have committed to nothing and the door remains open to us for us to continue immediately or later when we find it appropriate. And Nasrallah has said something similar in an interview he did with after the Oslo Accords, where he said Arafat's made a mistake. He didn't need to agree to get the things that he got. And so that is like, I think that's an adaptation to Israel breaking all of its agreements. And if you look at, long run North American history of treaties with indigenous peoples, they always break the treaties. They always make an agreement. They get a whole bunch of things and they don't fulfill. The settler state doesn't fulfill their end of the bargain. And Israel, of course, is patterned on that. It's modeled on that. So an adaptation that Sinwar is trying to educate his readers about is, don't make an agreement. They don't follow them anyway. You're going to be bound by it. They're not. And you're going to disarm yourself for the future struggle. Now, The other adaptations, you know, Sinwar wants you to understand that this is a long war. It's a multi-generational war that they're in, and that's part of why the coming of age format makes so much sense. It starts in the 60s with the childhood of Ahmed, and it ends in 2004 in a kind of an open-ended way, because that's when the book ends, with the second Intifada kind of ongoing. So Sheikh Ahmed, he says, I guess it's in the 70s that they're in this early stage where there's a critique that Mahmoud has of Ibrahim, where he says the Islamic resistance is not fighting as much. And so one of the youths asks Sheikh Ahmed, allow me, if there's a question I'd like you to answer, because it's frequently raised in every occasion we face. Where is the role of Islamists in national work? I mean, the resistance. Sheikh Ahmed smiled, looking around at the faces of those present, and said, we are now in a stage of education and preparation. And he began to explain the importance of education in building the future of nations and peoples aspiring to achieve noble goals. So they go through this phase of education and preparation, but then they go to an armed struggle phase. And the armed struggle phase is so difficult. It's all under massive surveillance. So much of what they do is keeping a secret. It's getting these rudimentary weapons. It's doing these really, it's going to jail. It's getting, trying to maintain your organization in the prison, hunger strikes in the prison. So all of these things are building up a resistance from nothing, building up weapons from nothing. And it goes all the way, the book goes all the way through this in a lot of detail until ultimately Oslo, when Ibrahim has to make this speech of the last lesson that I think is in the book, which is that resistance never stops. So even if you lose a war, even if your leaders betray you and make a bad agreement, it means you have to start over. It means there's a setback and you start over. He says, his character, Ibrahim, in jail, he kind of talks to his fellow cellmates. He says, all the sacrifices of the first Intifada have been wasted. And now with the politicians and negotiators, we've reached a deadlock. What's stopping us from starting anew? And he says, hundreds of thousands of martyrs will fall. Hundreds, if not thousands of martyrs will fall. Tens of thousands will be wounded. You'll find someone to propose going to a new Oslo, or whatever you want to call it. Every round of our people's struggle and sacrifice, the politicians come to reap the fruits. Because they rush to harvest the fruit before its time, they are punished by being deprived of it. Neither does the fruit stay on the tree to ripen, nor is it useful when harvested because it's not yet ripe. This was the solution with our people's first Intifada, and now we must start again until someone imagines that the fruit has ripened and its time has come, only to destroy everything our people have sacrificed for. So it's a little bit, Ibrahim gets a little fatalistic at the end for sure. But the point is, this goes on as long as it has to. And Sinwar himself said this explicitly when he came out of jail. So now to the question of did Sinwar miscalculate? I think what I want to say about that is, Israel portrays itself and the West portrays itself as this immense juggernaut, and the Palestinians it's like swatting a fly or something, the relative power. But in fact, I would say that Israel and the West has now transformed itself completely, because they're trying to adapt to Sinwar's strategy. So Sinwar has adapted, Sinwar and Nasrallah and the resistance leaders of that generation, they adapted a whole set of strategies to defeat Israel. And Israel kind of had this choice of either accepting defeat or going completely insane and driving the West completely insane. And so that was always the calculation. And I don't think it's a miscalculation to say, well, I assume that rather than going completely insane, they're going to come to some kind of sane conclusion. But that's not what happened, and that's where we are. So I wouldn't call it a miscalculation. I would call it like this profound transformation that Western society and Israel has been willing to undertake. Specifically, like, Sinwar and the resistance took prisoners to try to exchange for Israel's strategy of taking prisoners. And Israel's decided, no, we'll kill our own prisoners. We'll Hannibal our own prisoners. The resistance has tried to create this equation of rockets where they can rocket and hit targets in Israel in exchange. If Israel chooses to unleash all this destruction on them, Israel said, okay, fine, you can hit all the targets and destroy them. You can destroy our economy. Their economy is under this massive pressure. It's collapsing. And so all of these things, which I think are long-term unviabilities and long-term kind of insanities, have been in response, and a perverse response, and the alternative to having a rational response to having your strategies defeated by your opponent, which is all described in Sinwar's kind of book and what he laid out.
Well, kind of following that thread, you and I and a bunch of our colleagues and people we frequently work with do these roundtable conversations every couple of weeks, kind of talking about the role of those of us as witnesses to this genocide, coming from the imperial core in countries such as the US, Canada, France, Germany, Britain, et cetera, which are full partners in this genocide. How do we understand our role? Are we powerless? Do our views even matter? Do our protests matter? And for those of us in the US right now, do our votes matter? What have we learned about these societies in the last year that we either didn't know before or that has been clarified in the last 12 months?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I learned a lot. I in a way, I think I learned a lot about how naive I was more than about how our society works. International law, nonviolence, all of these kind of things that activists took for granted, these doctrines, I think they're fraudulent. I mean, and electoralism too. Electoralism, the idea how I don't believe that choosing between one genocidal party and another does matter. But if there's a non-genocidal candidate on the ballot, even if they're, say some irritating things once in a while, I think that does matter. I think your vote does matter. I think you do have to punish genocide if you have the vote.
Yeah.
I think our views matter a lot. I think that we we have to humble ourselves, right? Like, this is not, these societies that we live in are not where the issue is going to be decided. And I don't like that kind of Western idea that the only thing that matters is what we do or what happens here. I don't think that at all. I think that it's much more secondary, but that doesn't mean it doesn't matter, because if it didn't matter, there wouldn't be all of this effort to infiltrate all of our spaces. There wouldn't be all of this effort to suppress us. Of course it matters. It matters a lot. But I mean, in terms of humbling ourselves and how to approach this, I think, the phase of education and preparation is important. The situation is so bad and so urgent that the tendency would be, let's do something unstrategic. It doesn't, we have to vote, or we have to vote for Kamala because it's just so bad, and harm reduction or whatever it is. But it's the abilities we have, the capacities that we have to make change, they don't come from how bad the situation is. They come from the years of work that we put in terms of education and organization and consciousness. And again, like if you read Sinwar's book, like the situation that they were in when they were building their resistance is not, it's really, really amazing that they were able to do any of the things that they've done and still are. And so it's like the ability to diagnose the society you're in, the ability to understand the nature of the opposition. I think in the West, there are still a lot of misconceptions about like whether Israel is a foreign country or not. Like Israel, the whole Western elite is unified on the question of Zionism. You're not going to drive a wedge between the American or Canadian elite and Israel. That's not going to work. So there's just a whole lot of work of education and preparation and building capacity to do things that without that, it's like, yeah, we're desperate. It's a desperate situation and we have to do something, but it's like we don't have very many abilities to do very much, and that's what we have to think about and we have to work on. The other thing people, I wish more people would understand still, and our listeners here don't have this problem, but like Palestine, for many decades, people like us, we were fringe people. We were like, oh, the Palestine people, like, oh, you're the Palestine people, like this is this fringe thing going on with these Palestine people who follow this foreign conflict. And it's like, this is the central issue of our time. Like this is the central issue right now in every country in the world. This is more important than climate change. This is the most important issue right now. And it reaches every corner of Western society through the Western elite, which is 100% committed to the genocide and to Israel. And so if like understanding that the scale of this and the size of this task is definitely a first step to like Mike said in one of our therapy sessions, he said, people call us a single issue voter, but this is a single issue empire. Right?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So those are some of the things that I'm thinking about in terms of.
Yeah. I mean, Palestine is so interlaced in everything that we confront here in the imperial core, for sure.
Justin, let's talk now more about Israel itself.
Mm-hmm.
20 years ago, an Israeli professor called Arnon Sofer, who was an advisor to Prime Minister Ariel Sharon at the time, gave an extraordinary interview in the Jerusalem Post. The main thrust of his argument was to advocate for Israel's separation from Gaza. What actually happened in 2005 is the so-called Gaza disengagement. Israel withdrew its soldiers and settlers from inside Gaza and instead placed the territory under an ever-tightening siege from land, sea, and air. And with increasing frequency, Israel launched massive attacks on Gaza, destroying infrastructure and massacring civilians, a process it calls mowing the lawn. Mm-hmm. This is the policy that Sofer supported. But here's what he said in that 2004 interview, and brace yourself for anyone who hasn't heard this before. And he's talking about what would happen after that Gaza disengagement in 2005. He says, quote, "We will tell the Palestinians that if a single missile is fired over the fence, we will fire 10 in response, and women and children will be killed and houses will be destroyed. Further down the line, when 2.5 million people live in a closed-off Gaza, it's going to be a human catastrophe. Those people will be even bigger animals than they are today, with the aid of an insane fundamentalist Islam. The pressure at the border will be awful. It's going to be a terrible war. So if we want to remain alive, we will have to kill and kill and kill all day, every day." And now, if that isn't horrifying enough, this is what Arnon Sofer added. "If we don't kill, we will cease to exist. The only thing that concerns me is how to ensure that the boys and men who are going to have to do the killing will be able to return home to their families and be normal human beings. That was printed in the Jerusalem Post in 2004. Justin, can you talk about what you see happening in Israeli society? What happens to a society that perpetrates a genocide like this relentlessly and without remorse? Can those carrying out this crime indeed be normal human beings? What do you see happening in Israel, and what do you predict may happen in year 2 of this genocide? Is there any hope that internal factors will help end the genocide?
Yeah, this is something I've been watching since the beginning, and something specifically I've been watching the Israeli military for signs of collapse, of morale collapse. And there were articles that came out just this week about this, several. I mean, the CNN story you guys probably saw. I don't think you talked about it, Nora. But the CNN story about this poor bulldozer operator who said he bulldozed hundreds of people, and how the main conclusion from this is that he can't eat meat anymore. And what I thought was interesting was, though, like even in this kind of this thing where they're discussing their trauma, and they're discussing how difficult it is to do all these horrific acts, they talk about it in terms of what I saw in Gaza, not what I did in Gaza. And what that tells me is that there's still like a level of inability to say what's really going on. And when you can't say what's really going on, even when you're being really blunt, even when you're like this guy that you just quoted, where he says we're going to have to kill and kill, he's being really blunt, but he's not actually saying what's really going on, because he's not. There's a certain if you study psychology, like the way people project things onto others, or the way that they accidentally reveal things that they are trying to suppress. He's not worried about Palestinians being big animals. He's worried about the fact that Israelis are becoming insane and fanatical. All of those words that he's talking about Gaza, he's actually worried. And he says that it's not long between him saying that he's worried about Palestinian animals and then saying he's actually worried about whether the killers can become normal human beings. That's like, it's just a few words that separate that. What he's really concerned about is that the whole time. And likewise, they're not able to talk about the fact that they're doing it. So it's too painful for them to say, I'm doing these acts. So they have to say, I saw these acts, and it's painful to see these acts. But like, as long as you're denying what you're actually doing, you're not getting anywhere in terms of psychological insight or mental health. And there was another piece, or maybe it was the same piece, but they talked to a therapist, and the Israeli therapist said, he's a military therapist, and he said, well, when they tell me how hard it is to see what they saw, I try to normalize it. I try to remind them of their values. I try to remind them why they would why they would want to go to Gaza in the first place. And so the therapist is trying to normalize something, trying to normalize mass murder and genocide. Well, that doesn't work. It's, no matter how scientifically speaking, it's not normal. For most people, it's not normal. So there's going to be a number of psychopaths in every society that gets off on it and is bloodlust. Most of the people are pretending to, I think. And so there is going to be some kind of collapse, if they can't admit even that they're doing it. The collapse will come in other ways. They'll kill themselves. They'll commit abuses. They won't. And my thinking was, and continues to be, at some point, they're also not going to follow orders, because there are orders. If you have the right to kill whoever you feel like, I don't know that that's going to translate to the military discipline to make sacrifices to that are necessary to fight a war and win a military conflict. So I still believe that a military collapse is a possibility, just from this. And, there are a few instances in history that we can look to, even the Vietnam War, drugs, veteran suicides, attacking officers, mutinies, all of these things can happen in a war that is so pointless. And increasingly, like, the existence of the whole state is pointless. And the Hannibal Doctrine tells you that your comrades will kill you if you're at risk of getting captured. These are all kind of unusual. I've called it before a social experiment. And we don't know how the social experiment will ultimately shape up. But the economy is not viable. Your comrades will kill you. You're committing atrocities. You're not allowed to say why. You're going crazy. You don't know why. And in addition, every once in a while, the resistance is blowing you up in your tank, or, killing your senior officers, or rocketing you where you're trying to gather, sniping you where you are. So all of these things are combining, I think, to put a lot of pressure that Israel will never admit is on these soldiers. And I do think that is a possibility in the year 2 or year 3 that will have them. It can't. I just don't see how logically that can have no military consequences.
What? Just a quick follow up on that, Justin. What do you think of what the Israelis are doing is so depraved, and if there are people who oppose it, they're completely silent. I mean, you could maybe fill a phone booth with them if they exist. Some viewers may not know what a phone booth is, but at the same time, what's at stake for, like, CNN or the New York Times or the CBC to continue to whitewash these atrocities? I mean, is it just that they're part of the same state propaganda apparatus, or is there, like, what's your psychological reading of that, if there is one?
Yeah, my psychological reading of that is basically that it's racism, and racism has to also constantly be stoked. It has to constantly be taught, and it has to be retaught. And I think that there's a lot of that in all of these Western countries. So in Canada, like, pro-Israel organizations are always like have special programs in the school boards here. So they want to go in and, it's like, of course, we want to teach about World War II, and we want to teach about the Holocaust and so on. But they want to make sure that it's taught in a pro-Israel way, right? Like, they want to make sure that it's taught in this very specific way to young people. I read 𝐓𝐿 𝐕𝐳 in high school as one of my high school readings in like high school literature class or something. And I didn't even know 𝐓𝐿 𝐕𝐳 was radically pro-Israel, or that there were even things that weren't true in that book that he wrote. And so that is a key part of what happens in Western countries. It's, we've called it like it is. You guys call it that. Very few people call it what it is, but it's anti-Palestinian racism. It's a very specific. It's not the same as Islamophobia. It's not the same. It's a very specific pro-Israel program of racism. And so they are the media institutions of all of these countries are ideologically bound to that program, and also organizationally always reminded of that by the strong lobbies and editors that that have these mechanisms for punishing reporters and getting them fired. And lots of reporters have been fired in the West, in Canada, disciplined or fired, and they have very strong directives and specific directives. What's at stake? I mean, yeah, it's the way that it's one of the guiding ideologies of the society. It's hard to what's at stake is like potentially changing some really major plank of the ideological basis of of Western societies.
Yeah. We have a long way to go. Finally, Justin, your own novel, Siege Breakers, is fundamentally optimistic to the extent that it imagines a future liberated Palestine. Compared with when you published it way back, it seems like a century ago in 2019, do you find it more or less difficult to envision liberation? And what role do such imaginative exercises like writing a novel play?
I find it way easier to imagine. So the whole point of that writing that novel was to kind of break a taboo. Like what I was trying to break, you guys, it sounds so funny that this was a taboo. I was trying to break the taboo that the Palestinian armed resistance could be the good guys. That was the thing. I was like, I'm going to portray resistance fighters as if they're the good guys and as if they're
For a
action
Western
heroes.
audience.
Yeah, for a Western audience, as if they're the action heroes, as if they're like doing like cool action stuff, because it's a thriller novel. And there are, non-Palestinian characters, but the main character is this guy who's basically a Qassam squad, and he's doing all kinds of thriller type things that were done up until that point. So most of what I took was like from the 2014 war, and I mean, it was mainly written during. It was outlined and written during the 2014 war, when I thought like, okay, imagine if this, imagine the next war, which would be like the one they would actually break the siege at the end of it. And so that was like the taboo. Everybody knows that they're the good guys now. I mean, not everybody, but like, it's not a taboo anymore. We've watched them do this thing that I was trying to show. So that's, that taboo is broken. You don't need to read I shouldn't say this. You don't need to read Siege Breakers anymore.
It's really good. People should read it.
and we have an interview with you from 2019.
Oh, that's right.
On Nora interviewed you for the Electronic Intifada podcast, which I listened to last night, and it's still a really good listen. So.
Back when both of us had no gray hair, right?
Yeah, so it's way easier. And that book, I didn't have any Houthis. There's no Houthis in Yemen that are like joining the fight. There's no massive attack from Iran. I had a there's no character that's from Lebanon. There's no Hezbollah character. There's like oblique references to maybe they were helping or something. Like I didn't want to leave them out of the picture, but it's like, this is a much bigger global battle, and the Palestinians have much bigger and stronger allies than I imagined in Siege Breakers. It's true that I didn't imagine the depravity of Israel. I had the Israeli villains in the book are rational. They're what I think of like very calculating, very clever. They know the Palestinians, and so they're kind of trying to get to the bottom of what's happening and how so much resistance was built up under their noses. And that's like the villains' journey in that book. I did not see this coming, as the young people like to say, in terms of the depravity of what Israel has done. And so those are the two things that I have said this before. If I had written in 2019 what Israel is doing now, my book would have been seen as a unbelievably anti-Semitic smear book, because it's unbelievable how it would have been. How could I have imagined? What kind of person would I be if I imagined this stuff happening? So yeah, it's beyond the human ability to imagine or project, and for that reason I don't even feel bad that I wasn't able to project it.
It's there is an extraordinary transformation. I mean, just the discussion we had today. Think about those. I mentioned the statements that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Justin Trudeau and Keir Starmer put out on social media. And the social media response to them was literally tens of thousands of people saying, "You're not going to tell us how to think." There were thousands of replies saying, "Yahya Sinwar is a hero. You are the criminal." I mean, it's amazing when I think back to post 9/11. I don't, we didn't have social media in the same way, but still, nobody would have had I think people were too intimidated to say the kinds of things they say today that they may have felt. I'm not, of course, comparing the 9/11 attacks with, but in terms of questioning official narratives, in terms of asking the basic questions like, why would something like 9/11 happen? Who are the people who are supposedly behind it in terms of like the dirty wars the US was fighting in Africa? You couldn't even ask those questions. And now people are they have no time for the bullshit. And I think that is a massive transformation that is not reflected in our official government media, whether it's the CBC or the BBC or the New York Times or CNN, a semi-official media. But people no longer, this is why people hate them so much and don't trust them, because they know they're being lied to. Justin, I could listen to you all day. I love listening to you. And for those who want to hear more of you, they can do so, because you have a really fascinating YouTube channel, which I listen to and watch all the time, called the Anti-Empire Project. And you do regular sit reps about Gaza, about Lebanon, about the regional situation, where you have just incredibly interesting insights. You write on your own Substack. Now you write at the Electronic Intifada too. Right. I was shocked that was your first article. Why hadn't you been writing for us for years?
Who knows?
But you're welcome to do so. And I hope you'll come back and talk to us again soon.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you for everything you do.
Thank you, Justin.
Oh, he's the best. And yeah, he should come back on soon.
So thoughtful, and really, I listen to all of Justin's commentaries, and I get so much from them. And he's never going to give you like sort of false optimism.
No,
he breaks things down as very thorough, but at the same time, he gives you a perspective that makes you see the big picture in a way that is I think very realistic and encouraging.
Yeah.
I mean, even if in what we're living through now is horrific, there's no denying that. But we have to look at this in sort of a bigger context to understand where we may be going. So it's very valuable insights, I find.
It is. And at least once a week, John joins Justin for a sit rep. And so let's bring John. We're all interconnected here today. Hey, John.
Hey guys, I felt like jumping in because
I know
when he's in my headphones,
we kept you.
I was on the back. Yeah, he kept me in the back.
Separate today.
What about?
Right, but of course, those discussions you have with Justin are very valuable, and they are at Justin's YouTube channel, the Anti-Empire Project. So.
Yeah, and we did one on Sinwar on the day that Sinwar died that I think people should check out. It was definitely reacting in the moment to it, and that's one of the valuable things about the sit rep is that there's no time to process. We just get right into it, and I just wanted to say I thought that that the focus on the novel of Sinwar is very important in the Palestinian struggle as well. It's not just a literary project. It's a project that the fighters read. We saw last week in an ambush position a Qassam fighter reading Mahmoud al-Zahar, a leading thinker within the movement, reading his novel while waiting to detonate an explosive device underneath a tank. And these books are written for the fighters. They're written for the people of Palestine to read and to understand liberation in a different way than a textbook, or to give a variety of ways to get into the topic, and the ability to have characters act out the the strategic and the tactical decision making just makes that very rich. And, you know, Mahmoud al-Zahar, whose book they were reading in the ambush position, he wrote a book on Imad Akil, who is the first sort of Qassam operative. So they're writing in order to put this into history so that their people understand the history of the struggle. And so to be able to analyze Sinwar through that novel, I just think it was a great setup, and I hope it complements what I'm going to do here in the Resistance Report, which is much more nuts and bolts.
Yeah, I know it will. And people, sorry, I forgot to mention, people were asking in the comments where they can find a copy of Sinwar's novel in English, and I think it's floating around somewhere in PDF form. So I think it shouldn't be that hard to find.
Yeah,
Again,
I've seen quite a few links to it, and it is available from other booksellers. But yes, you can find PDF copies online if you search for them. The Thorn and the Carnation.
Exactly.
I might have just broken some British law by saying that. Who knows?
Guess we'll find out.
It's really a German law.
Absolutely. All right. Well, John, lots to cover. It's been a very hard week again, but a lot of resistance and defense. So let's get into it.
Great job on the news again. All right. We will start the Resistance Report as ever in Rafah, and this week starting in Rafah is particularly important because it was the site of Yahya Sinwar's death, fighting as a fighter. We can see here the map of the Gaza Strip. In the Resistance Report today, we're going to cover from Rafah through Khan Yunis, up through the Netzarim corridor, which is still being targeted every single day. And then we're going to focus on the north, of course, in Jabalia and the Jabalia refugee camp, which is not on this map, but the Jabalia refugee camp is just south of Jabalia, Balad, the city, and it forms essentially a contiguous population center from the north of Jabalia all the way through the refugee camp and into the city of Gaza City. And to the south is the beach refugee camp, the Shati refugee camp. This is a continuous strip of city. If you were to be driving as, say, a foreign journalist from Toronto on his first trip, you wouldn't know. I didn't know when I was leaving Jabalia and entering Gaza City. You don't necessarily, I mean, you can tell the refugee camps, of course, and the downtown core of Gaza City is a major metropolis, so that's obvious to tell. But I'm just saying that the demarcations of these, they're fighting in Jabalia, they're fighting in Gaza City, the lines bleed literally and figuratively across those borders. So just to say that when we get to Jabalia. But we're going to start in Rafah because we've been talking about Rafah for the last 5.5 months. I've given you guys every single week on this show all the details necessary to understand what is going on along the Philadelphia corridor, where Israel is attempting to set up and hold the terrain to lock in the Gaza Strip, the way they were working on the tunnels, and the way that a week, 2 weeks ago, 18 days ago, up and left in the middle of the night, the 162nd Brigade Division took the brigades that were in Rafah and moved them up to the siege on Jabalia. And in doing so, they left behind just a small division with one brigade that is a training brigade. But this is what they have done to Rafah. Let's look at these next few pictures. These were put together through satellite imagery collected by Evan Hill, who works at the Washington Post. Don't blame him for that. But yeah, does solid open source geospatial work. And you could just see, like, you can't even really describe this. It's like you took a physical eraser and just destroyed the entire society of Rafah. The refugee camps are just eliminated. The destruction is total. And you're going to see that in the situation with Sinwar. Sinwar was 150 meters away from an Israeli military outpost that the training brigade was situated at. He was 150 meters from there. That post is 800 meters from the Egyptian border. And so you're talking about the Philadelphia corridor is the story. This area that we've talked about on this show week after week for 6 months ends up becoming the place where Yahya Sinwar is. He's meeting with commanders. He's in a tactical vest. He's got weapons. We'll get more into that. But let's show the footage that everybody has seen at this point. The Israelis released this footage of this drone entering the building that had already been tank shelled and looking around. If you look dead center, you can see sitting in the chair, which is symbolic already because Yahya Sinwar sat in a chair in his demolished house in 2021, and that became an iconic picture. You can look at him here with his arm tourniquet because the bottom half of his arm has been blown off. You can see he's got his face covered with a makeshift keffiyeh, and you can see he's holding a stick. And he's going to pick this stick up and throw it at the drone that's hovering here. The Israelis are in with the drone because when they came with their force, Sinwar threw 2 grenades at them and they ran away. They broke contact is the military term. Broke contact. To tell you that in lay terms, they ran away. They have no interest in fighting in any kind of face-to-face combat, even with somebody who's been just hit by a tank shell. So they break contact, they go back to their outpost 150 meters away, and they fly this drone to see if where the person in the building is. And they see this person, they have no idea who they're looking at here. The reason why the training brigade in the army for 9 months, a platoon commander's training school, is going here with a drone from that outpost. They have no idea who they're killing here. And when they see Sinwar throw the stick at them, they do what Israel does. They called in a tank shell and fired a tank shell and dropped the house on top of Sinwar. That happened at 3 o'clock. They first see him. I'll just go through the whole story. At 10 a.m. on the day before his death was announced. His death was announced on the 17th. He was killed on the 16th in the middle of the afternoon. At 10 a.m. in the morning, from their outpost, flying drones, this training unit sees movement. They don't see fighters. They see movement. And because Rafah is supposed to be depopulated, flattened, their genocidal army sees people moving and immediately fires tank shells at them. That's how Israel behaves. They bury the building and they move on with their day. That's what they did in this case too. They buried Sinwar in the building. They dropped the roof on top of him and they went back to the base in the middle of the afternoon. Never filed a report, never told, the Shabak that they killed maybe a senior leader or even bothered to find out who that leader is, which is something that fits with Israeli tactics throughout this war. They don't do battle damage assessments, but they happen to do a battle damage assessment. A sensitive site exploitation is how other militaries call it. Basically, where you go back to the target that you hit and you see who you killed and you attempt to get intelligence from that strike. And Israel doesn't do that. And that's why every single commander that they say they kill, they offer no evidence for it at all, including, by the way, the commander of the Tel Sultan battalion that was with Yahya Sinwar, Mahmoud Hamdan. Israel told us they killed Mahmoud Hamdan in September. They didn't do a battle damage assessment. They didn't go and look. They just tell you, yeah, we killed this person. We killed Mohammed Deif. We killed Marwan Issa. There's no proof of that. Qassam has not acknowledged their deaths. Qassam has acknowledged the deaths of leading figures. And so this story is just remarkable. It's a complete accident that it's Sinwar. It's the likelihood of this attack just dropping the building on him and him becoming one of the 12 or 13,000 people that are buried in rubble that nobody can get out from the rubble because Israel doesn't allow heavy machinery to operate. They blow it all up, as we've seen. That's why people are digging with their hands to try to get people out. So the extreme unlikelihood of Israel actually finding Sinwar, and you can see him there in that freeze frame. He's sitting upright in his chair. He's got his arm tourniqueted. He's sitting defiantly in the chair with his face covered. He's in a tactical vest. He's holding weapons. He's holding grenades, which he threw at the force. He's holding an AK-47, and he's holding a Glock pistol. And the Glock pistol that he's holding is the Glock pistol that was captured by 𝐓𝐡𝐞 and presented to Sinwar in 2018 during a very consequential foiled 𝐓𝐡𝐞 raid, Sayeret Maktal raid, Israeli Special Forces raid that was attempting a clandestine operation to penetrate Gaza and to plant listening devices to try to get into the closed network that 𝐓𝐡𝐞, under Sinwar's leadership, perfected to have a closed network that the Israelis can't get intelligence, not like Hezbollah, where Israel announced the names of the Hezbollah commanders and Hezbollah confirms the names. We don't have any confirmation of any senior commanders except for two. Ayman Nofel, who is the Central Middle Camps commander, division commander, and Ahmed Gandour, who is the Northern Division commander. Those are the only two confirmed kills in battle that Israel has had and that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 has claimed. They claimed the Sinwar death the next day, but this is happening in the middle of the afternoon, the day before Israel announces it. And it's just the fact that it's an accident, the fact that it's not, that it wasn't because of any failing of the resistance. In fact, what you have here is the head of the Politburo, although he is a 𝐓𝐡 Brigade's founder and was the founder of the Majid, the internal security system that Hamas built that became ultimately part of the 𝐓𝐡 Brigades. He's a military man, Sinwar, but he's the Politburo head of Hamas. He's the overall head of Hamas. And we see him in a battle-destroyed area communicating one-on-one with commanders of those battalions. And it opens up so many questions about where Sinwar, who we were told was hiding in a tunnel surrounded by captives, which we all on this show always said was a lie, because we know that he met with the captives on his first day, on the captives' first day on October 7th. Sinwar went in his perfect Hebrew and spoke to the captives. And he said to the civilians, he said, we'll take care of you. I promise to take care of you. You're in our hands. You're our guests. You'll go home in the next day or two. That's what Sinwar told the captives after October 7th. And now we see him on the front lines, 150 meters from an Israeli position, communicating with the important battalion commanders, fighting as a soldier. And Israel released this video thinking that they had shown a success, which is just, it's so absurd. I can't help but laugh because the entire world saw this video. And this video is going to be iconic for generations of Palestinian struggle. Sinwar has now set the bar for leadership of the Palestinian national movement so high that you have to fight to the last moment with anything that you have in your hand, with a stick, even when your arm has been blown off. You reach for a stick, you sit up in the chair, upright, in the exact same way as his iconic photo when Israel destroyed his house in 2021. There's just so many elements of this story that are failures for the Israelis, failures for the Americans, who have poured tens of billions of dollars into this war. They have their own American military and intelligence officers embedded within the Israeli, trying to get any kind of signals intelligence, human intelligence, and they failed. They never have any idea where Sinwar is, but Sinwar is communicating. He's doing the ceasefire talks. He's writing letters once he became the overall head of the Politburo after the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh. He's writing letters to the Ansar Allah movement. He's writing letters to Nasrallah and to Hezbollah. And so he is doing everything the Israelis couldn't find him doing, in part because of what Justin said, because he's lived this life of security that puts operational security as the primary concern for a resistance fighter. And he implemented that on the ground for the Palestinians. And the fact that he is holding the gun is captured from one of those Israeli special forces who tried, hidden as Palestinians, dressed up as Palestinians, to come into Gaza and plant listening devices, because Israel knew as far back as 2018 that they did not have a line in on Qassam's communications. They were completely dark. And that is a critical element of the war that we've been watching for the last 385 days, including October 7th, that took Israel by surprise in such a fundamental way that it left them reeling. That was because of operational security that came from Sinwar, that came from prison, where he was a prison leader, and elected. It's an elected job. The prisoners elect Sinwar to be the prison leader, and he teaches. When he came out he was released in the Gilad Shalit prisoner exchange, which was a cross-border operation executed by his brother Mohammed to capture the tank gunner and bring him back into Gaza. During that prisoner exchange, Sinwar said that he didn't want to be part of the prisoner exchange, that he wanted to stay in the prison. He wanted his other comrades to get out before him. That was his disposition. And ultimately that didn't happen because the prisoners said, no, you're going out. And when he got out, the first thing he said was, Israel thought that prison was my grave, but it was my university. And he immediately set about, after 2011, as soon as he arrived in Gaza, he said, I promised everyone that was left behind in prison that we will get them out, that we will free them. And he also makes consistent analogies between Gaza's siege and a prison environment. To liberate Gaza, to break the siege, is a prison break. And that's a term that became commonly used to describe the October 7 operation, was that it was a prison break. And so the connections between those, the fact that he's throwing grenades at Israeli soldiers, that Israeli soldiers run away, send drones, and then follow up with another tank shell that kills him after this still photo I made here of him. They dropped a tank shell and dropped the house and killed him. He was killed as if he was any other fighter. And from the Palestinian side, he was just any other fighter. And that's what made him a leader that will go down in history for what he did. And this video that the Israelis showed, which they believed, that just shows how disconnected they are from all of this, from their genocide, that they believed that this was a win for them, when really you just have every single solitary child in all of Palestine acting this scene out already. You could just imagine it all over Jenin in the north, all the way down, to the internally displaced all over Gaza, that the kids see this and what this does for their morale, to see their leader fighting from the front, advancing from the front. He didn't try to get away. He didn't try to run away. Once he was engaged in contact by the Israelis, he fought. and he fought with a weapon that was captured from an Israeli Special Forces soldier and was presented to Sinwar. You may recognize the gun from some famous speeches of Sinwar when he's speaking on the stage. And the one time in 2011 when he says to Israel, if you want to assassinate me, I'm about to walk home. I'm leaving in 10 minutes. And he stands on the stage and he tucks the gun in his pants with the silencer. That's the gun that was captured in this 2018 foiled raid, that counterintelligence operations of Qassam, of the sort that were in the 1980s, Sinwar's job within the movement, before Hamas was Hamas. And as Justin said, when Hamas was seen as being slow to form, Sinwar's in jail in the early to mid 80s. Before Hamas exists, he meets Salah Shahada, who's the founder of the Qassam Brigades. He is a follower of Sheikh Ahmed Yassin. And so he gets the most important portfolio, which is internal security. The Palestinian revolution cannot function if there's collaborators working with the Israelis amid their people. And between the years of him going to jail in the 1980s, and the October 7th operation, Palestinians virtually entirely cleared collaborators and made it a non-factor in their resistance. And that's something that Sinwar began. That was a project that began with Sinwar. Ultimately, Sinwar is arrested at the beginning of the first Intifada in 1988. He's actually arrested in Jenin. He's not arrested in Gaza. He's arrested in Jenin, where he's moving through the West Bank, setting up the cells, the underground cells that would become the Qassam Brigades. He's setting up those cells. Israel arrests him for basically for petty, for activism, for throwing stones, for being in demos. They don't arrest him because they think he's the mastermind of setting up the Qassam Brigades. And so he's in prison on small charges. And once the Intifada starts to take shape and the Qassam Brigades start to emerge as underground cells and that rise up from the underground and capture Israeli soldiers in order to exchange them for prisoners who are in Israeli jails, the linchpin of the Palestinian national movement, of the armed struggle, is to capture Israeli soldiers and exchange them for Palestinian prisoners. So once Israel realizes that this has happened, that Qassam has built these underground networks, that's when Sinwar is then retried. He's retried and given multiple life sentences. He's tried for operations that he was said to have planned or that existed even when he was in prison. Israel does that with all the leaders. That's how you have sentences of 17 life sentences. They give the leadership, they take all the numbers of the killed or captured soldiers, and they just tack it onto their file. And Sinwar was that way. So even Israel themselves didn't know Sinwar was the man that he was when he was arrested. So that's an interesting fact. And when he's released from prison, as I said, in the Gilad Shalit is captured in 2006. The prisoner exchange is in 2011. He comes out of prison and immediately joins the Hamas Politburo. He becomes effectively the defense minister who's in charge of the Qassam Brigades. And when in 2017 he's elected, all these positions are elected. He's elected in 2017 as the overall head of Hamas in Gaza in 2017. When he's at that point, he is the key bridge between the Hamas movement, the political movement, and the Qassam Brigades, the armed wing, which is much more popular than Hamas within Palestinian society, and a natural bridge that he took from defense minister. You know, he didn't come out of prison. First of all, before he came out of prison, Israel said, you all have to sign in the Shalit deal. You all have to sign this paper that says you won't go back to resistance activities. And Sinwar said, no, we're not signing that. And as the leader in the prison, Sinwar said, we're not signing that. And so nobody signed it. And as the prisoner exchange was happening, Israel was really upset about that because they saw it as a big loss that they couldn't get these guys to sign away that they would go into retirement. And, you know, Sinwar wanted to live a life, maybe wanted to go into retirement, but did the exact opposite. He took the portfolio of the most important resistance movement within the national liberation struggle, and he worked to align them with the Hamas movement. When he first came out of prison, he wanted immediately reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas. He was a key player in the 2004 prisoners document, which was attempting to do that reconciliation, especially after and then followed on by the coup attempt by the US and Israel to overthrow the Hamas government in Gaza. So those elements of his story are a critical part of the trajectory of the national liberation struggle that you see today that culminates in October 7th. October 7th is a Yahya Sinwar operation. It's not that nobody else in Hamas would have done that operation, but his leadership allowed the connection between Hamas and 𝐤𝐿, and to have an agreement on a strategy, which he took very seriously. He was a student of Israeli society, Israeli military intelligence, Israeli military strategy itself. And he, in the Sun Tzu sense of know your enemy, know yourself, he believes in those so critically. So all of these things together, taken together, culminating in him being in that chair in a tactical vest, holding an Israeli weapon that was captured in a counterintelligence raid that prevented Israel from tapping the lines, the internal lines that have allowed this war to continue, because Israel cannot break the 𝐤𝐿 brigades. They cannot break their communication. They cannot assassinate their leaders, and their mid-level leaders are all still intact. The key leaders, his brother Mohammed, who will likely take over the 𝐤𝐿 brigades, or at least take significant roles, unless it's true that Mohammed Deif and Marwan Issa, the top two commanders of the 𝐤𝐿 brigades, have been assassinated, which 𝐤𝐿 has not said, and Hamas has said it's not true, and Israel's provided no proof for it, but they've carried on with that story. In any case, Mohammed Sinwar, who was not in prison, he was an operations chief in Gaza, his brother, he has the authority and the following and the operational success to carry on what Yahya Sinwar led. And so Sinwar's defeat is not, Sinwar's death is not a defeat in any way of viewing it. You lose an incredible leader for the Palestinian national struggle, but it's going to inspire and show the way for generations of Palestinians that will take over the leadership of the Palestinians. When you're talking with Justin about the Oslo process, who's the Palestinian leader that can now sign away rights for Palestinians when their previous leader fought covered in dust with his arm tourniqueted, throwing a stick at a drone on the front lines, communicating with commanders? It's just a remarkable story. We could talk about Yahya Sinwar for hours, and maybe we will do that in the coming shows, or maybe we'll focus on it in the coming show. But the important thing to understand is that trajectory, the role of him as an internal counterintelligence agent that Sheikh Ahmed Yassin and Salah Shahada, the founder of the 𝐤𝐿 brigades, would see in him the person to do that. And then he would go at that time and travel throughout the West Bank, such that he's arrested in Jenin, the most historic place of resistance other than Jabalia in the Palestinian national cause. And if anything, it's more so because Jenin is the place where Sheikh Izzeddin al-Qassam was killed And that was the beginning of the Palestinian national armed struggle. We're going to talk more about that later, because I have an Abu Ubaidah speech that came out on October 7th that talks about the loss of your leaders, that talks about assassination. So, that's Yahya Sinwar in a little nutshell, and the way that all interplays with that final drone scene is really remarkable, and I wanted to show you that. So let's look at the next videos. The Shalit Exchange released 1,026 other people besides him. So besides Sinwar. So look at the house that he's in. That's the house that he's meeting with the battalion commander of the Tel Sultan battalion. Israel said that they had killed the Tel Sultan battalion leader when they were checkmarking boxes for their local audience to say the war in Rafah is done. And just look at that destruction, the level of destruction. We have another one here of the same thing, looking from inside the house, and you can just see the view from inside the house. They just completely flattened Rafah. And that's what those satellite images from before are attempting to show you. And so next we have here the martyr poster that Hamas released, and we have Ismail Haniyeh, Salah Aruri, who was killed in Beirut earlier on in the war, and Yahya Sinwar. And it says what Hamas has said many times throughout this war: we offer our leaders before our soldiers. They're advancing, they're not retreating, they're fighting. They're already calling Yahya Sinwar the fighting sheikh because of the way that he went out in battle. So that's just a critical part of this. So let's look at the next one, because Hamas released a video just to show you some of the historic moments of Sinwar. When he comes out of prison, he gives these speeches, these important speeches. You see him here walking amongst the people of Gaza. He's not a polished politician. He's a straight shooter. You can just tell by the way he's articulating that he's a straight shooter, but he's a tactical genius. And Israeli interrogators, there's his little son Ibrahim with him there. There they are in prison. And this is the critical moment, and it's not always clear to everybody, but Palestinian prison isn't where you're sent away, isolated from your society and isolated from the movement. You can see them here walking. They're having these meetings, these top-level meetings with senior Qassam figures inside the prison. And you can see, even though their conditions are brutal, you can see that they're all living together. And this is a crucial victory that was won inside the prison in the years that Sinwar was in leadership in the prison. The hunger strikes forced Israel to not have people be in solitary, to allow the movements to be together inside the prison, so that the prison could become a university, so that they could have lecture talks, lecture time, study time. Sinwar translated books from Hebrew to Arabic about military intelligence. Then they would study those. And that's what he's saying. They thought Israel thought prison was our grave, because he was sentenced to multiple life sentences. The idea was that he was never going to get out. His brother executes this raid and effectively gets him out of prison, and alters that one capture of one soldier, alters the trajectory of the Palestinian national movement in ways that we'll be talking about for generations to come. It's a remarkable aspect of the story. And the one famous line was after the 2021 war. A journalist asked him in a press conference because Benny Gantz, the prime minister, said that he was going to kill Sinwar, and Sinwar said, "If you threaten it and don't carry it out, your image will be tarnished. As for your threats, I have appeared in front of the media many times, it is true, but I will move freely and normally, and I am present, and after a while, You will all leave and I'll go to my office. I'll run my tasks. I'll get in the car with some of my men. I'll go to my house and they know where I live because it's obvious. And after I think it was after the 22 war, he was giving a speech like that. And he said, I'm going to walk home. He was going to a prayer tent for a martyr's tent for a fallen commander. And he said he was going to walk there and it'll take me 10 minutes to walk there. And that's the footage that you see of him walking down the street. Just a remarkable leader. And the way that his death happened is something that you just couldn't make it up. Justin was talking about novels. If you wrote it that way, I don't think people would be able to believe you. Let's look at number 8 tomorrow, because Abu Ubaidah handled this related to Nasrallah. This is his October 7th speech. He said, "When have assassinations ever been the end of liberation and resistance movements anywhere in the world, especially in the history and present of our Palestinian and Arab revolution? If assassinations were victories, anti-colonial resistance would have ended with the assassination of Sheikh Izzeddin al-Qassam in the woods of Yabad near Jenin 90 years ago. And if assassinations were victories, the Al-Qassam brigades would not have carried out the Al-Aqsa flood operation on October 7th, 20 years after the assassination of Hamas's and Qassam's most prominent founders." And he's speaking here of Sheikh Yassin and and Abdulaziz Rantizi. And he's also speaking of Qassam commanders, the founding commanders like Salah Shahada, who I spoke of before, and Adnan Al-Ghul, who was the founder, along with Yahya Ayash, of the development of the indigenous arms development of the Qassam brigades that came to fruition in this war of attrition, where Palestinians are able to fight a war of attrition now 380 days on. And you're going to see in the Jabalia segment that I do in a few minutes that they're still firing all of those weapons a year into battle. In fact, I think we're going to show you a video where that's pretty clear proof they're still making them and are ready for this battle of attrition. So that's Yahya Sinwar in Rafah. But the Rafah brigade is still fighting. So let's look at number 9 tomorrow, because we showed last week this operation they're showing here, a booby trap. I broke this down on the show last week. It's a booby trap southwest of Khan Yunis, southeast of Khan Yunis, northeast of Rafah, along the buffer zone, and they blew that up. So that was part 1 of this ambush. The Palestinians have a spider-like tunnel network. So blowing up that part of the tunnel didn't change anything. And 5 days later, the Israelis go back to the same place. And the Palestinians see them go back to the same place and go and rig up the tunnel a second time with barrel bombs. And you can watch, if you watch at the top here, over to the left of the two, maybe we can loop it around again. You can see the soldier enter the tunnel. Here they are inside the tunnel. You can see a couple of shawads here. You can see a barrel bomb. Oh no, here it is. Watch the two on the left, the soldiers in the upper left that are standing on the berm. They're going to step into the tunnel. You can see the many triangles, but you'll see the soldier disappear down into the tunnel as he goes down there. Disappears down into the tunnel. There's multiple of them down into the tunnel. And even though, and every time we see these operations now, we have to think, was Yahya Sinwar talking? Was he standing behind the guys when they had that piece of paper? He's not in the tunnel behind a desk being a Politburo member. He's a fighter on the front line, moving around, communicating with battalion commanders. Anyways, Israelis go back to the same spot in Al Rayyan and get blown up twice in 5 days. They never learn, and the resistance is always one step ahead in these. So that's against an engineering unit in Rafah. We're going to move to Jabalia now. Could we throw up the map C? Yes, perfect. So Netzarim corridor, talked about this for the whole war as well. it's still under the same fire every single day that it has been for the last 300 days. All the other resistance factions are firing every day, mortars, artillery, rockets, firing on the Netzarim corridor where the Israelis have cut the Gaza Strip in half. So those operations continue, and I try to mention them every week, but in this show, I brought you other factions carrying out the battle. We're gonna see all the factions participating in this battle in Jabalia. This is the third invasion of Jabalia, of the Jabalia camp, which is south of Jabalia there on the map. And it's the third week, as Nora pointed out, of the besiegement of Jabalia. And these fighters, I told you on the first week that there was 35 operations. This week, there was 50 qualitative operations. The operational tempo of the resistance in the third invasion, which is looking exactly what genocide looks like. And Nora's report covered it as well as anyone in the media can cover it, has covered it. It's just comprehensive. They're targeting schools, they're targeting the hospitals, they're targeting the aid distribution centers. They cleared out a school today and then burned it. They burned the school. Last week, they cleared out the aid distribution center and they burned the flour in the aid distribution center. 80 people killed a day is what's happening to what we're watching. And amid this, Qassam is carrying out 50 qualitative operations, 35 operations targeting tanks, troop carriers, and D9 bulldozers, 8 operations targeting troops with IEDs, Gaza-made weapons. All of this is happening with Gaza-made weapons. The Philadelphia corridor is not, as Netanyahu said, the oxygen of the resistance. The oxygen of the resistance is unexploded Israeli weapons and indigenous weapons manufacturing to create these weapons that we see and are going to see be used here in the next series of videos. So let's look at number 10 first. This is a Qassam-built thermobaric warhead, which is what they use against troops from distance. If they're up close, they'll use an IED like a Radia. We'll see that later, but you can see the red triangles there. They're going to the building. And then look at this fighter. The fighter's hiding behind the window. It's the opposite of soldier in a window that the Israelis do. And we see this throughout the war. The Palestinian soldiers just routinely are better soldiers, better trained, better executors than the Israeli soldiers. And now you see the tanks show up to save the people. You can see the urgency of the tanks because they hit the right building. They hit it with a thermobaric warhead, which is a fuel air explosion. And it's a nasty weapon. You don't want to be involved in being hit by a thermobaric warhead. We're going to see one fired at Israeli troops in the north later on in the program. But the vehicles come to look at him in the window there. That's the opposite of soldier in a window. He keeps his position hidden. He sets up to fire out behind the window. You can see in that shot, his full body is inside the building. He's not sticking the nose of his weapon out the window to be flagged. And so then you see the troops show up again. So a successful thermobaric warhead strike. And these operations are going in order of the days when they happen. So these were at the beginning of last week. And number 11, Tamara, always on it. Thank you. So here, and this is the thing. After the Sinwar, like, have we had other videos where one of those hands were Sinwars? Is he writing these command operations? It's just seeing what we saw in the killing of Sinwar just opens up so many questions about the way he had led during this battle. So what we're seeing here is a Mark 82 bomb. This is an Israeli-American bomb. It's a 500-pound bomb. And I've told you before, the 500 pounds is the total weight of the bomb, but the explosive material is about half, just less than half, about 45%. So if you have a 500-pound bomb, you got 200 pounds of high explosives. And that's what they're doing here. They're creating a barrel bomb out of it. They're wiring it. We saw them poking holes through the wall, and this fighter explains why they poked holes through the wall. We don't care. We're here 6 or 7 meters from the enemy. We don't care. We want to ignite them, not to let them ignite it. He says, like, we want to trip the detonation. We don't want to create a tripwire where the Israelis trip over it. We want to detonate this. So it's more dangerous, and they run the cable longer, but here they are monitoring from the alleyways. The commander says in audio you can't hear, he says, you'll be monitoring from the safe alleys between the house. And here we see a backup camera being used to detonate the first of 2 IEDs in this operation. So this is a return to sender operation. There's a number of them this week. And then this is the guys who are in the alleys. They're now going to come up on the rescue force and predict, as they do in many of these operations, correctly predict the route that the resupply or the reinforcements in this case, resupply sometimes, reinforcements in this case, will come. And here they're setting up an anti-personnel radia. That's a radia device built in Gaza, one of the handful of IEDs that they build themselves. And the fighter detonates it also himself. And that was the point of that operation, was the fighter saying, we don't care that your bullets are over our head, your drones are buzzing. In the audio track, you can get it on my Twitter. In the audio track of this, you can hear the drones and the gunshots. And the fighter says, we don't care. We want to ignite this. We want to detonate this bomb. We don't want a tripwire, which is one way to set up the bomb, as a tripwire. And a tripwire was used successfully in an anti-personnel IED this week that killed the commander of the 401st Armored Brigade, the highest level operational officer killed in the war, was killed in Jabalia camp by a tripwire that was set up in an observation post. So these guys here are punching out the wall so that they can be the ones to physically press the detonator button. They could just put a tripwire across the road. The tank can hit the tripwire and set it off itself, but they're running this operation. And this is where they say they don't care. And they want to be the ones to ignite them. They want to be, as you can imagine, these fighters who have lost their families, who have watched this genocide, they want to be the ones hands-on to press the button. The exact opposite of the soldiers who find anyone that's moving in Rafah and kill them with tank shells. And then when you go to see if they're still there and someone throws a grenade at you, wounded with one arm, you still run away and call in tank shells. Using a backup camera to do the detonation, we've seen this throughout the war as well. So when we're looking at capabilities, this is the Jabalia camp fighting the third full-on war of their camp, and they're using all different appropriate weapons. We're not seeing, still not seeing, see there's a Yasin 105. It's not a Tandem 85. He's using the weapon that you use against a tank, and 𝐤𝐿, the National Army, is doing that. And this is a radia against troops, and they're setting it up. And this guy's showing this to this other fighter in a way that we don't usually see. So we might be seeing in this video trainers, because we know that 𝐤𝐿 has massive new recruits from this. So that was another just remarkable operation, complex ambush. So number 12, and this is 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Islamic Jihad. They always do this. They give us a little more run on their film. So you can see these fighters move through the camp, move through the alleyways, dip into the alleyways. They know the place. The Jabalia Brigade is fighting in the place that they live. They've got eyes here. They're spotter on 2 tanks. They have 2 spotters, and you're going to see 𝐓𝐡𝐞 use anti-tank RPGs, not tandems here, but their spotters are in both places in good spots, and you can see how the spotter is used. The spotter doesn't, after we see this, we'll see they're going to strike both of these tanks. There's the fighters moving through the alleys and moving through the destroyed buildings, using the destroyed military vandalism as cover. and firing on that tank there that you see. The spotter is the cameraman in that case, whereas this one looks like it's a helmet cam. Or they don't have helmets. Forehead camera, body camera, GoPro, and he hits with this strike, and you're going to see those are Israeli soldiers there running away from their tank, and you can see the tank in flames there. You can see the smoke. So the soldiers run away from that, and you want that if he's a National Geographic photojournalist, you'd want him to climb through there and show us the burning tank, and then. But that's not what you do when you're a military spotter. You don't give up your position. You don't risk that spotting position so that we can get a little extra footage of what it looks like, so that people on Twitter can say, yeah, but does that actually do anything to the tanks? Even though every day, including this day, Israel claimed 3 dead from anti-tank fire in Jabalia camp. So we know what these weapons do to the tanks. I've read to you on previous programs what it's been like to be a soldier within within a tank when it's hit by these. It can burn in the inside of the tank easily. These tanks are the most armored tanks in the world, and Palestinian homemade weapons. They're copies of effective Soviet weapons, but they're made by the Palestinians. And we've seen that all through the war. It gives them the ability to fight. So the building up of the weapons of the movement is key. The security and operational security that they operate under is key. And those are things that were part of Sinwar's leadership. There was a chance in 2021, another one in 2022, and another one in 2023, early in 2023, where there could have been wars. And Sinwar said, no, let's wait. Let's wait until we have the capacity to fight fully. Let's do 13. Thanks, Tamar. So, again, return to sender. Our fighter here, the fighter is saying, writing in hand, writing, your goods have been returned to you. This is part of this genre of operations, the return to sender operations that we've been seeing happening all throughout the war. And because of the 60,000 airstrikes on Gaza, there's literally thousands of these unexploded bombs, and 𝐓𝐡𝐞 gets them into their hands and can reuse them. So this one's planted in the ground. It has writing on it. And this tank happens to stop at just the right spot for the operation. And this fighter says that this is from the Jabalia camp. We give this operation as a gift to you, our fighting sheikh, Abu Ibrahim Sinwar, who was martyred while advancing. It's already within a day of his death. They're already calling him the fighting sheikh who was martyred while advancing. And that says return to sender. So another quality operation targeting the 401st Armored Brigade, who earlier in the war, 𝐓𝐡𝐞, when they were fighting in the south, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 put out a video that about basically saying how many had been killed from the 401st Armored Brigade. And they said that the marks of 𝐓𝐡𝐞 soldiers' shoes are still visible on your face, because they were part of the October 7th capture as well. So 4 IDF soldiers were killed and 1 wounded in explosions. 1 seriously wounded in explosions. Another was wounded in a sniper operation. So here he's dedicating it to Sinwar, and you're going to see this for the rest of the war. You'll probably see this for decades to come, because the impact on morale to see your commander fighting in the way that he fought, right to his last moments, and with just the dignity with which he fought is remarkable. Number 14 is a 5-part ambush. We'll try to do it in one swoop. This is a 5-part ambush that's going to begin here, identifying intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, top-notch, always by 𝐓𝐡𝐞. They find the building that the troops are in. They hit it with a thermobaric warhead, also built in Gaza, an RPG-7 thermobaric single. They build tandem thermobaric warheads, but that was just a single. And then these fighters, 2 𝐓𝐡𝐞. See, look at those 𝐓𝐡𝐞s. Those don't look like the normal 𝐓𝐡𝐞s. Those look like they had just been made, and they're colored in a different way. The paint from the previous ones probably doesn't exist anymore. But these are probably being built in battle, which is a question that we've all had throughout this war. Are they regenerating their capacity? And sure, all signs point to yes. Then you get a hit right there on the Namur troop carrier that went to bail out the thermobaric warhead hit. So again, they predict the route. Here comes a tank. We have the second Archer. It's going to meet this tank. Again, the spotters inside the building within spitting distance of this. Just remarkable. We see this all the time, and you never get used to it, how close they are to that tank. Here comes the fighter moving from an elevated position after the spotter spots the tank. They move upstairs, and then watch this strike. No, there's no trophy on that strike. That is a direct hit to that tank. And you'll see flames here. They're going to show you a freeze frame with flames of the tank burning on the inside. And later that tank, you can see it there. Later that tank is going to be towed away and under fire. So that's the 4th 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Archer in this video. Here comes the 5th. And he's got an even better look at it. This is a cameraman underneath. If you look up at the top on the right, you can see the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Archer above him. And you can see that it's a camera because of the way it looks down like that as he's turning. So they have 2 fighters basically stacked on top of each other there, something we've seen before too. And then this isn't something we see all that often. We see it with Hezbollah, but this is them attacking 𝐶assam, attacking with PK machine guns the recovery operation of the tank. They're firing on the tank's recovery operation, and you're going to see in a moment here the tank being there it is, in flames, being dragged away and being targeted by machine gun fire at the troops that are around for that extraction. So that was a detailed ambush, pretty remarkable operation. This one is an Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades. This is the Nidal al-Amoudi Brigade of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, and this is a rare video, and it shows that the fighting factions in Jabalia are capable of fighting beyond just Ssra'a al-Quds and the 𝐶assam Brigades, the 2 main factions. And the 𝐶assam Brigades are the national army, and they have the built-up stocks of these kind of weapons. But here, the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades are getting into the... We've shown a few of these videos. The Al-Amoudi Brigade has access to a what appears to be an Al-Ghul sniper rifle, a 50 cal Syed, Iranian Al-Ghul. And so we've seen a couple of their sniper videos before, but here they are detonating against the tank crew there. And then they're going to come with the second stage of this ambush. Well, there's their second spotter showing the burning vehicle in the street. And then we're going to see the spotter here identify the rescue operation, and they're going to fire on that with a PSL, a Romanian PSL sniper rifle that looks a bit like a Dragunov, but is not. And so they're firing there. So they're in the battle here in Jabalia as well. This is a fierce fight in Jabalia. The crime of genocide is happening, but this is a fierce fight. Number 16 is a sniper operation that has to be edited. You have to go to my Twitter again to find the uncensored version of this, but this is a family program, so it freezes right there. He gets it in the back, and a rabbi, this story, he's been variously described as clinically dead, but definitely in need of prayers according to his rabbi. So he's not in good shape after this sniper attack. And this is in northwest Gaza City. So this is more over towards the Shati camp, which gives you just an idea of how spread out the siege is of the north. Here's a fighter with a Shawad. This is an EFP. He's going to run out and set it. and then he realizes halfway that he forgot to put the cover on it. So he stops, and we're going to show this a couple times because it's good. So he and then he runs back. The danger, and then he's detonating this. He's presumably in one of those houses, and that's a spotter in the back. There's two people in this operation. He's presumably in one of those houses. And that's why they cut the film. They didn't want to show you where he ran to. But we'll loop it around one more time and watch how that's a Namur troop carrier. Watch the upper floors of the building beside it that's straight ahead. Watch that building straight ahead. So you can see how vicious that weapon is. It explodes. Shrapnel hits the upper, and overpressure hits the upper floors. So here he is. He's got it set. He runs, and then he's running to safety, and then he goes, oh, and he stops, and he turns back. They gave him a freeze frame there to show his detonation cord, but he goes back and puts this bed sheet over it, just enough to make it look. If he didn't go back, the mission would have failed. The tank would have seen that plastic metal, and they would have detonated it before. But as you can see, the mission was successful. He increased his likelihood of dying many-fold by pausing and turning around and running back under aerial surveillance, constant aerial surveillance. But to execute the mission properly, that's what needed to happen. And so he did that. So operational success, and I'm sure he got props from the guys when he got back for that, because that was dangerous to do and to execute. And if you just looked at that footage in the area, let's watch it one more time. Just look at the wasteland that Israel has done to Gaza City, which was a metropolis, and it just looks like there's barely buildings. You can see his cord there. You could see how that would have been spotted. But if you throw a bed sheet over, like, it doesn't seem like it does much, but it just looks like a piece of people's lives that the Israelis have blown all over Gaza. So they normalize it. They think that's just part of some kid's bedroom that they destroyed in every one of these houses that they've destroyed. It's just, cover the military aspect of this. But what's going on in Jabalia right now is disgusting. It's impossible to digest. And the courage of the people in the north and the refusal to leave is every bit as heroic as the resistance. So 17B here is a joint operation between the PFLP Abu Ali Mustafa brigades and the Popular Resistance Committee's Nasser Saladin brigades, and those are Israeli mortars. So these are return to sender operation too. Those are Israeli mortars. And the PFLP and Popular Resistance Committee say, in loyalty to the blood of our great leader, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 and to all the martyrs of freedom and liberation, they fire captured Israeli mortars at an Israeli position in the Netzarim corridor. So I just wanted to bring that one because he both salutes. We don't do a lot of mortar videos, but the martyr element of this one and the joint operation, the firing of Israeli mortars that they captured is remarkable. So that's a great. And then number 17, this one's a pretty extraordinary one that happened yesterday, and Tamara and I got it in after the deadline because it was just too significant an operation. So this tank moving in, trying to clear out these same tanks, emptying hospitals, emptying shelters, and then burning them. The reason they burn is because they forced everyone out of the shelters. So that's they burned their beds because their beds were left behind. And that's the secondary explosion in that operation. And this is a second camera angle of this tank operation. And presumably what we're looking at here is unexploded ordnance. It's taken from Israeli bombs, put into barrels. Maybe it's the bomb themselves, as we've seen. So that's a remarkable operation too. And there's a couple quick ones here from the West Bank I wanted to bring. We'll just tack them on the end because the resistance in the West Bank is continuing here. This is 4 IED operations versus IDF armored vehicles in Nur Sham's camp, which they call Little Gaza, because of how it's been destroyed by the Israelis. They've killed all of their senior leadership of the Sarayal Quds in Nur Shams, and then they put out a video that just shows operations from the last 10 days of spectacular operations. This is the Northern West Bank armed struggle, the Intifada. This is the triangle of terror that the British called it, going back to the British mandate: Jenin, Nablus, Tulkarm, Tubas. And so they're still fighting in the West Bank. And at any other time, we would be calling that West Bank battle, at least in the north, as Abdul Jawad points out. It's maybe wouldn't say it all over the West Bank. There's definitely stuff happening all over the West Bank, but particularly in the north, it's an intifada. It's an armed struggle in the north. And then number 19 after this is in Tubas. Tubas is still fighting as well. The vehicle is going to enter the scene here and be hit. So Tubas is fighting as well. And I'm going to do just a quick run through of Lebanon. There's so much to cover in the resistance report these days, especially when Yahya Sinwar is killed. But bear with us here. We're going to continue on. That is the West Bank, Gaza, Palestinian Front resistance report. And we're going to switch now to Lebanon and show you just a few operations from Lebanon. Past 3 weeks. This is an Al-Mas top attack anti-tank missile. I've described this to you before. This is a captured weapon. This weapon was captured during the 2006 war, reverse engineered in Iran, and then sent down sent to Iran to be reverse engineered and created the Al-Mas. And this is it being fired on the Golani Brigade just across the border west of Al-Aqsa in South Lebanon. A direct hit, and they're going to fire a second one here as well. So something that we don't see in the Palestinian situation is something we are seeing by Hezbollah. Double tap attacks are very effective. We can go to the next one. Tomorrow 21 is this is a Apache helicopter getting chased by a drone that it can't find, and this drone is on its way to target Netanyahu's villa north of Tel Aviv. And it's just to give you a sense of the drones versus Israeli Air Force capabilities. There's no sirens until the very end of this, and the helicopter can't shoot it out of the air, despite the fact the helicopter being right there. This drone, we know now, we knew on the day on Saturday that Israel, that Benjamin Netanyahu's bedroom was hit at his villa. He wasn't there, but we know that villa was hit. And Israel waited 4 days to let the censor know. We could do number 22 is another angle of that drone flying through Palestine. And this week, people are talking all week about how these drones. Yesterday, the Israelis were chasing these drones for half an hour and couldn't find the drone. The drone finally landed, and Israel still couldn't find where it is. So the drones are still vexing the Israeli aerial defense array. Number 23 is an improvement in, these are ballistic missiles. These are the first time we've seen Hezbollah use short-range ballistic missiles. This is a game-changing weapon that is precision-guided with a 400-kilogram warhead, 250-kilometer range. You can see there it's a qualitatively different rocket, and this has been fired on military positions in Tel Aviv. And over the last week, Hezbollah operations went from 17 to 21 to 25 to 28 to 39 yesterday. There's no indication that the decapitation of their leadership has done anything to the rocket firing. Israel says 70% of the rockets have been knocked out. There's no indication of that. They still fire 4 times more rockets today than they did before Israel's 3-week war began. Is this 24? 24 are 24 Nasser ones. These are this is something Nasrallah's talked about for a long time. These are precision guided kits that are being added to their previous rocket artillery. So these are Fadi rockets that I introduced you to a few weeks ago. These are Fadi rockets with precision guided kits added to them. And this is an upgrade to be using them. They use them the first time this week. They claim they have a 5-meter hit rate, success rate, aim zone within 5 kilometers. This is against the Lid IDF base, and you can see the soldiers there outside the base. And one more here, we have a new rocket artillery, number 25. This is interesting because this will be used should the Israelis actually advance into Lebanon. They haven't done that yet. They're still in the first villages. They haven't taken first villages. They're not pushing deep into Lebanon at this point. But this is a fragmentation artillery rocket, which is interesting to be used. And it's designed by Hezbollah. All 3 of the rockets I just showed you are designed by Hezbollah. And this is a fragmentation warhead that covers 35 meters with fragmentation pellets, 5,000 pellets per rocket. And the range is 3 kilometers. So they fire these as an anti-personnel weapon. If the soldiers are advancing up the high mountains, you fire down with this weapon. It's very effective. And then just one last look at Iraq, because the Islamic resistance in Iraq has been carrying out drone attacks, usually about 4 a day. The Israelis get maybe half of them. They're aimed primarily at Eilat, the port at Eilat. They're aimed at the Golan Heights. They're aimed at military installations in the Jordan Valley. And the Islamic resistance in Iraq is now doing these consistently. They're marking these drones as drones for Nasrallah, drones for Sinwar, drones for the Lebanese people, drones for the Palestinians in Jabalia. And they're launching these drones, and the Israelis have to answer to these every day. This is what it sounds like. A drone launched from Iraq at Israel was shot down by Israeli air defenses near the southernmost city of Eilat. A second drone hit in an open area. They never seem to get both drones. They get one of the drones. And we know that these drones from the Iraqi resistance have made it through and hit bases in the Golan. So to have this multi-front war is happening in a consistent way, in a way that it wasn't previously to these past 3 weeks or month or so. Really, when the war escalated in Lebanon, was the moment of the Islamic resistance in Iraq really getting involved, sort of meeting the call by Ansar Allah in Yemen. Here you see for Sinwar, they're launching for Sinwar already. So remarkable operations this week. And that is the resistance report from, one more from Lebanon and from the south of Gaza, and a lot of material this week because the battles are fighting hard amid the brutal crimes of the Israelis.
So comprehensive. Thank you so much, John. There's I know a lot of us here at the Electronic Intifada and people, online were saying this when video emerged of Yahya Sinwar throwing the stick at the drone in that final act of defiance and resistance. A lot of people kind of remembered our dear friend Rifat, who said a year ago on this program that, as a teacher, as a scholar, as a writer, he said, like, the toughest thing I have in my house is an expo marker. And if the Israelis come and invade my home, I'm going to throw that marker at them if it's, the last thing I do. And so it's just this kind of very, like you said, it was this incredibly, cinematic, absolutely, kind of just so emotional, and it evoked all of these, these themes that we've read, these heroic stories in like ancient Greek literature of these warriors, or like, the battles by indigenous communities here against the the white settlers. And it kind of that's what I thought. I thought of Rifat, and I thought of these legendary historic epics of fighters defending their land and their people from invaders. And anyway.
The battle in Jabalia is remarkable. It's remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you said, amidst so much just depraved horror, the stories and the visuals coming out of northern Gaza, like I said, just unspeakable.
Yeah, and I think that's why we need to dig in on that resistance. Took a bit longer, but just to see the detail of those operations that are being carried out amid this genocide is super important for not being defeated.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah, I know we all struggle with
defeatism. I think we're at the point now, that it's just hard to absorb the scale of the events that have happened in the last month, let alone year, from the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah and Ismail Haniyeh, and now the killing of Yahya Sinwar. But I feel like now there's an understanding or a confidence among the resistance, certainly, but among people watching all over the world, that none of this is going to make a difference to the outcome. That's really the crucial point here, is that the loss of Yahya Sinwar as an individual is enormous. The way he chose to go, because there is that famous video of him saying, and this was after the 2021 war, he said, "I'm 59 years old, and what I fear is dying of a heart attack or corona." By the way, he always wore a mask. As I was going through, news agency photos to illustrate stories we were publishing this week of Yahya Sinwar. He always wore a mask during the pandemic when he was in public. And I think it speaks to that sense of like, you are caring for a community. And it just struck me that he didn't see anything. I know that we're stepping on more controversial territory here than even the resistance, but he didn't see anything that was emasculating or weak about that. He believed in
protecting his community.
So yeah.
Well, I know we're almost at 3 hours, but we wanted to have a very quick discussion about the plan to exterminate everyone in northern Gaza. And just recently, and settlers have been talking about this since the pullout in 2005, wanting to resettle Gaza. At the same time, they're also talking about a so-called Greater Israel in terms of depopulating, ethnically cleansing people in Lebanon, so that they can build their cookie cutter settlements there. But so let's just, Ali, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, let's go through a little bit of what happened. And there's some additional news about this today. But on Monday, hundreds of Israelis gathered for a conference near the boundary with Gaza to promote the idea of sending Israeli settlers back into Gaza. And here's a video of Israel's national security minister, the ultra-far right leader Itamar Ben-Gvir, leading the crowd in song. It's short, I promise. And what it actually says, absolutely stirring. And what it says there on the podium is "Na'arachim lehityashvut be'Gaza," which is we're preparing for settlement in Gaza. And Ben-Gvir told the crowd, "We are the owners of the land, and when we act like it, this is what brings results." He repeated his call for Gazans to, quote, voluntarily transfer to other countries because, quote, that land belongs to us. Now, this is not new. It's not even the first conference calling for the return of Israeli settlers to Gaza. There was a similar conference in January, but this time, is it different? In the Israeli newspaper Haaretz on October 21st, Rachel Fink writes, quote, "It might have been possible to dismiss the entire event as just the collective rantings of a fringe group of extremists with no actual power to affect policy, were it not for one thing, the lineup of speakers, because one by one, some of Israel's most prominent politicians made their way to the stage to express support for resettlement," end quote. And in its own editorial on October 21st, Haaretz states, quote, "The settlement movement's political ideas actually represent a sizable segment of Israeli society." And the newspaper adds, quote, "This is the time to wake up and understand that these dangerous ideas have already penetrated deeply into the ruling party. This is especially worrying because facts are becoming entrenched on the ground that perpetuate the army's presence and develop the infrastructure for civilian settlements, such as roads and army bases," end quote. What is adding to the concern is the emergence of something called the General's Plan to expel or exterminate the population of northern Gaza through starvation. And we talked about some of the effects of the deliberate starvation in northern Gaza earlier and last week. Palestinian human rights groups are raising the alarm about the plan, as our colleague Maureen Murphy wrote on October 20th, quote, "The Palestinian group said that Israel is implementing a plan spearheaded by 𝐵𝐸𝐸 𝐈𝐧𝐭, that's the general in question, a close advisor of Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, aimed at exterminating or expelling Palestinians in northern Gaza. 𝐈𝐧𝐭's scheme involves laying a full siege, denying the entry of humanitarian aid, forcing Palestinians to leave, and unlawfully declaring whoever remains to be a military target." Early in the genocide, 𝐵𝐸𝐸 𝐈𝐧𝐭 had advocated for Israel to allow or encourage epidemics among the Palestinian population in Gaza. People may remember him from that. And he thought that was a means to, quote, "bring victory closer and reduce casualties among Israeli soldiers." So, and then we saw the emergence of polio, which is presumably something 𝐵𝐸𝐸 𝐈𝐧𝐭 would favor. Now, as Haaretz reported also on Monday, Israel is denying that it is implementing the 𝐈𝐴 plan. The newspaper says, quote, "In response to the international questions and criticism, official Israeli government sources made it clear that it has no intention of implementing 𝐈𝐴's plan of transferring hundreds of thousands of people from northern Gaza to the south," end quote. But the newspaper says that even Western diplomats from countries supporting Israel do not believe this. Quote, "Contacts in the Foreign Ministry and Defense Ministry told us that explicitly this isn't the plan, but it's hard to be convinced when you examine the military's actions on the ground," one diplomat said, according to Haaretz. And here is something even more alarming from the same article referring to Israel's operations in the north of Gaza. Quote, again, this is the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, quote, "Senior defense officials told Haaretz last week that the government was prioritizing the removal of people from northern Gaza in order to establish new settlements there instead of pressuring for a hostage deal with Hamas. Commanders on the ground said that they sensed that the operation's objective was to pressure the civilian population to move south in line with 𝐵𝐸𝐸 𝐈𝐴's proposal. Senior defense officials believe that the government is neglecting the negotiations and advancing the creeping annexation of Gaza politically and as defense policy," end quote. Again, that's all from Haaretz. According to the human rights research group Forensic Architecture, Israel's new ground operation aimed at forcibly displacing the entire population of northern Gaza accelerates a pattern of genocidal violence since October 23. Reports from Jabalia, where the refugee camp has been besieged for 2 weeks, show intensified attacks on Palestinians. And I just want to add one thing. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in the region, always a harbinger of bad things to come. And he reportedly asked Benjamin Netanyahu to repudiate the Giora Island plan and say that wasn't the goal. And reportedly, Netanyahu wouldn't do that. He just used some formula to fudge it. So
Yeah.
that's a breaking event. So I guess my question, and one reason to bring this up is resettling Gaza Israel's real intention? Could it become a self-fulfilling prophecy where even if it is not the plan right now, if the genocide is not stopped and the population is expelled or exterminated, Israel might do it anyway? And remember, every American red line is a preview of what Israel will actually do, with ultimately full acquiescence. And finally, is it even possible, even now, when we see the fierceness of the resistance in Jabalia and other places, does this settlement plan presuppose conditions that Israel will never be able to achieve?
John, take a crack at that.
Yes, I think the resistance is too developed to do that. The Israelis were not able to secure their settlements in Gaza in 2005 after 4 years of the Intifada, with considerably less military experience, materiel, manufacturing, all of those things that we know now are so much more developed. I don't see under fire building houses in that area. I can see it being a Zionist dream. When they started fighting in Lebanon, the Jerusalem Post put up a story about how Lebanon was supposed to be their territory too, and that they could be building villas in Lebanon. I don't think, in military terms, that they say that the enemy has a vote, and in this case it's an Israeli plan, so the enemy is the Palestinians. And I think that the resistance is far too developed to allow that kind of project to continue. Israeli occupation within Gaza is one thing that is frightening, I think. Development, the way that they're operating in the corridors, in the Netzarim corridor and the Philadelphia corridor. But the idea of building villas, there's a whole segment of Israeli population that was really upset about the 2005 disengagement. I covered that disengagement from Gaza and from the outside of Gaza, and the Israelis were really mad about having to leave those settlements, and have always wanted to go back, and believed that if their settlements were there, that any of the wars that happened in between never would have happened. Cast lead and pillars of defense and defensive, the 2014 war, the 2021 war, all of these times, and then especially October 7th. The argument by the Israeli settlers, the far right, was that if they had settlements in Gaza, that they would have somehow prevented those type of operations. I don't see it. I don't see the resistance allowing that kind of development to happen.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that this just seems like a desperate roll of the dice, unleashing the settlers like this. It seems like a desperate roll of the dice for the politicians, for Netanyahu, and for the Israeli military. I mean, this just really relates, I think, to what Justin was saying about the signs of decay within the Israeli army, within the Israeli ground force. Talking about this rash of recent articles like this disgusting CNN article. And this is actually what I'm writing about at the moment. And I've got a translation of one of the Hebrew articles that was circulating on, sections of it was circulating on Twitter this week, and there's a really telling quote from that, with one of the relatives of one of the soldiers who, as having all these terrible mental health problems to the extent that they're refusing to go back to fight again in Gaza because they're being fired at and fired on, and their colleagues are being killed by Palestinian fighters. and this is such a really telling quote from it. It says, quote, "The platoons are empty. Anyone who isn't dead and wasn't wounded was emotionally damaged. Very few remained who came back to fight, and they're not entirely intact either, mentally speaking, that is." That was before all the assassinations in Lebanon, and since then, he's been telling me, that is this soldier, the mother's son, he's been telling me, "I don't know what army they're planning to go into Lebanon with, but there is no army. I'm not going back to the battalion." So these are not like principled refuseniks. These are defeated soldiers, mentally defeated soldiers.
Yeah. And militarily defeated soldiers. I mean, looking at the reports coming out from the front line in southern Lebanon at the border with occupied historic Palestine. I mean, just yesterday, right? There were a number of ambushes on soldiers, on Israeli soldiers, and there are videos now coming out of soldiers like literally running from the border back to their base. And
what do they call that? Breaking contact,
right?
But what it's also that there's no respite from it.
Yeah.
It's like you can be away from the front, but how often is 1 million, 2 million people in and around Tel Aviv having to run for the shelters?
That's right.
Because there are reports of a drone coming. Flights are being cancelled and rerouted, and so your ability to leave the country isn't even secure. And I think something that Justin Podur points out is that what's the point of any of this? Like, if all of this horror doesn't guarantee that you can live a quiet first world life in occupied Palestine as an Israeli settler, then what's the point? What's all this effort and loss for? And they can't live that quiet, normal first world life anymore, as if they were in Montreal or Toronto or London or Pittsburgh. It's now you're on the front line, even if you're at a cafe in Tel Aviv.
And they can't even like bring their settlers back to those northern colonies. I mean, Kiryat Shimona is all but empty.
Or the Gaza envelope.
Yeah, or the Gaza envelope, exactly. And like John said last week, that that Israel has lost more territory than it has in decades. In just the last few months. It's kind of significant. So I mean, what should we be looking for? What should we be concerned about as these these kind of high profile, as the top of the Israeli political echelon, like Ben-Gvir continues
it's historically. Sorry, Nora.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, finish your point.
No. I was just going to say, as these leaders are continuing to kind of beat this drum of we're going to not only achieve all of our, so-called war objectives, which they haven't achieved any, but we're going to continue to resettle, to return the Israelis to the north while, expanding into Gaza and Lebanon. What should we make of all of this?
I think it's very highly historically significant what you were just outlining, Nora, that for the loss of territory, Israel has lost territory, in effect lost territory. And I've been saying this for the last year, we've been saying it on this stream for the last year. The map changed on October 7th. It didn't just change for a day. It's in effect, maybe they will send the settlers back, but so far we're a year in, apart from one or two people here and there, the settlers of the Israeli kibbutzes, the settlements that besiege the Gaza Strip, they're depopulated. They're completely depopulated, and there's not really much attention on this fact.
Right. And as Justin always says, in order for Israel to execute these plans, they have to win the war first. So, we shouldn't be giving these insane projects that are being planned by Ben-Gvir and these, ultra far right extremist fanatics, more credence than it's worth at this point.
But just a final thought on this. At
Yeah.
the same time, they are still actually starving and murdering and exterminating
Yes.
the population of northern Gaza.
Of
So
course.
that is happening.
Yeah. I mean, that's all that Israel knows how to do.
Yeah.
That's all they can actually achieve is genocide and mass extermination, trauma, suffering, and I mean, and so far, the West is not just letting them do it, but helping them do it materially.
Fully
committed. Yeah.
Kamala Harris is more committed to helping Israel exterminate Palestinian babies than she is to winning the election.
Absolutely.
And that's why she may lose.
Yeah. Yep. Well, much more to come. Let's quickly go through the website. As I said at the very beginning, we published just a number of phenomenal features this week by our writers in Gaza. I highlighted the Asama Nabi feature that he wrote about Gaza City and the municipality. We also have, as I mentioned, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 talking about the farmer who was killed on Monday. But there are other features that we at the Electronic Intifada wanted to highlight. This one about mental health professionals struggling with Gaza's overwhelming trauma. That's by Ahmed Assamak. I mean, the amount of, before this genocide, in the 17 years of siege and before that, mental health professionals in Gaza were saying that that children especially experience not post-traumatic stress disorder, but chronic traumatic stress. And now we have 12 and a half months of this slaughter and this genocide, and I can't even begin to imagine what mental health care looks like, especially for children in Gaza right now, and what it's going to look like for generations. But an important feature there. Ali, do you want to talk about Haneen's?
Well, Haneen has been a long time writer, and she talks in this about like the illness she personally, she's always focused on the health sector, but she talks about her own experience with ill health in the context of this genocide. And at the best of times, people may be vulnerable, but then when you think about just the conditions people are living in, the sanitation, the lack of nutrition, the unavailability of healthcare, and so she talks about this from a personal perspective that really, for me, drove it home. Like for many of us, we can access healthcare if something, we can go to the doctor, we can go to the urgent care clinic, and that's just absent for most people in Gaza.
Well, let's leave it at that. As always, go to electronicintifada.net to read our stories, our features, our op-eds. Again, Justin Podur has a beautiful feature about Yahya Sinwar in the context of and analyzing his novel, The Thorn and the Carnation. We have really sharp analyses.
By the way, I mean, I'm sorry to just that photo that with Justin Podur's story. It's worth looking at. That's of Yahya Sinwar in May 2021 after the war, walking home from that famous speech. And on the photo services, I was looking, I edited Justin's story, and I was looking for photos. There were so many photos of people in Gaza taking selfies with Yahya Sinwar. And I just think it's worth pointing that out when you read these statements from Justin Trudeau or Keir Starmer or their boss Joe Biden. The bosses Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, say, "Oh, how it was a reign of terror, and he ruled Gaza with an iron fist, and the world is." Just the reality is so different from the fiction that they're spinning.
It's all projection from them. We have also I highlighted some reports by Maureen Claire Murphy, our senior editor, and some new reports by David Cronin. Of course, you can read all about what's happened with 𝐓𝐡𝐞 and how we're fighting back there. Of course, go to our YouTube page, sign up, become a subscriber. We're also streaming on all sorts of different platforms. Be sure to sign up for our email list. You can go up at the very top, click the Get Updates, and fill out your info. And if you're so inclined, if you can, if you're able to, if your material conditions support it, click the Donate Now link. You are helping the Electronic Intifada remain strong and vital. There's a beautiful finch outside my window right now. And you're helping us support our writers in Gaza under extremely unbearable, unspeakable conditions at this point. That's about it. I want to thank, obviously, of course, as always, Tamara Nassar, our brilliant director and producer of this live stream, Maureen Claire Murphy, our senior editor, for writing and pre-production, Michael Brown for fact-checking, Ellie 𝐓𝐡𝐞 for the social media clipping, and for moderating the comments today. John, Asa, Ali, everyone at the Electronic Intifada, thank you all so much, and we'll see you next week.